The protagonist lost his father at a very young age. As he and his sister matured, their mother told him to become a shaman. After all, he possessed the qualities of a shaman, and the spirits protected him. Moreover, if he did not follow this path, a terrible wrath would fall upon him. Using this argument, his mother forced this religion upon him, giving him strange poems and rituals. However, the boy had already planned his life and could not accept any of it. Revolted, 10 years passed as he focused intensely on his studies, nearing full maturity. Then he ended up dead in a traffic accident on a rainy day. Unable to believe it, in his final moments, he wondered if this was the wrath his mother had spoken of. But things got even stranger when the young man was reborn, just like Jesus. For him, the idea of life after death was inconceivable. Everything his mother had told him was true, yet people never understand something unless it happens to them. Unfortunately, our protagonist only realized this after leaving this world. Suddenly, in a desperate impulse, he wonders what he is doing now. We see our protagonist reborn, his hand resting on a book as he teaches students about magic circles. Then he understands. He is disguised as a professor in a magic academy. Located in a small town, the magical academy is covered in snow and surrounded by various buildings. At the train station, well-dressed people wait for their transportation. Everyone hands their ticket to a man before boarding the train, and the professor is in line. The conductor asks to see the ticket, and the protagonist promptly hands over the paper. Thanking him, the man allows the professor to board the train and wishes him a good journey. Hurriedly stepping inside, the professor searches for his cabin, which is in the 4th compartment, 3rd room. Reaching the plaque labeled room 403, he finds his room. When he opens the door, he notices a man sitting in a chair, reading a newspaper. The old bearded man sitting in the chair greets him warmly, saying it's a pleasure to meet him. Entering the compartment, our protagonist responds with a small, polite smile. Releasing steam, the train starts up, its wheels turning as it accelerates. Amid the icy mountains, the train follows the tracks toward its final destination. The two men, sitting across from each other, are focused on reading their books, until something in the old man's newspaper catches the protagonist's attention. He realizes that the civil war in Utah has ended with the princess's faction emerging victorious. Commenting aloud, the protagonist remarks that the civil war has finally ended. With a stern look, the old man says he had been wondering if this war would ever end. Our protagonist notes that it feels like just yesterday when the prince's faction was gathering forces, and now it is finally over. Apologizing for the delay in introducing himself, the protagonist states his name, Ludger Chelsy. The man on the train introduces himself as Gerard, saying he has no surname and assumes Ludger is a noble. Ludger confirms this but adds that his family has fallen into decline. Questioning Gerard about his final destination, he learns that he is heading to Line de Brno, the capital. Chelsy remarks that touring the Exilian Empire is great due to its advancements in magical engineering. He then adds that he is traveling to Leafvelk, as he has been appointed to teach at the Serin Academy in Exilian. Gerard comments that Ludger must be very skilled despite his young age, and Ludger replies that he barely made it. He explains that most people do not even come close to passing, making it a point of pride. Ludger thanks the old man and takes advantage of the Civil War discussion to ask about a rumor. The key figure behind the princess's faction's victory was not a mage or a knight. In truth, it was an unheroic wandering mercenary named Machiavelli. The old man shows no reaction, and when questioned, he says he assumed it was just a false rumor. Ludger knows it is not false after all. Machiavelli is one of the names he used while searching for an object. Ignoring the topic, Gerard asks if Ludger will start teaching at Serin as soon as he arrives. Chelsy confirms, as he has been assigned to teach second-year students at the academy. Gerard comments that Ludger must be even more talented than he claimed. Then suddenly, something seems to click in Gerard's mind, and Ludger does not understand, so he questions him. Just as Gerard is about to explain what he is thinking, a massive explosion occurs outside. As the train shakes from the blast, the two passengers try to comprehend what just happened. Ludger asks if the train exploded, and the old man replies that it is magical and should have been well protected. At that moment, the old man understands what is happening and says it must be an ambush and a robbery. Gerard suggests that someone must be targeting a wealthy merchant or noble. Our protagonist states that if this is happening, then there must be a mage among them. Gerard proposes that they either hide or escape, and Ludger volunteers to go ahead as a precaution. Outside the cabin, Ludger realizes that they are the only passengers in the 4th compartment. Gerard questions whether the passengers are still inside their cabins, considering they have a protective spell. However, the cabins are no longer safe since the exterior of the train had the same spell. They notice that the explosion occurred in the 3rd pavilion and wonder why the intruders haven't entered there yet. The old man remarks that if it were just thieves, they would have gone to the 1st pavilion, and Ludger understands that it's because the nobles are there. As they discuss their escape plan, a thief begins breaking the window behind them. Startled, the two jump back just as the window shatters and the thief climbs in. Ludger orders the old man to step back, protecting him while taking the front and gripping his cane. Gerard notices from their expressions that the bandits don't seem to be in a good state. Without giving them time to think, a masked man charges at them, armed. In an instant, our protagonist casts a blue energy sphere spell. As the energy sphere flies toward the bandit, he appears to be electrified and is thrown backward. Falling to the ground, the masked man remains motionless due to the electricity spell. Gerard asks if Ludger has taken the man down, to which he replies that he only paralyzed him temporarily. The old man warns that it's dangerous, but the protagonist ignores him and proceeds to interrogate the thief, placing his foot on the bandit's chest. Ludger asks why he invaded the train. Struggling to speak, the masked bandit only grunts and murmurs before suddenly bursting into laughter. Irritated, the protagonist tells him to stop laughing and demands an answer. In agony and full of hatred, the thief says that people like him deserve to be eliminated. Suddenly, the man opens his coat, revealing a bomb strapped to his chest, ready to explode. The bomb's timer indicates that only 1 second remains before detonation. Gerard shouts for Ludger to get out as fast as possible while staring at the bomb in horror. Before he can react, the bomb explodes in a massive combustion, destroying everything around it. Thick smoke fills the train, which is now in ruins, with debris scattered everywhere. Covered in dirt but unharmed, the old man asks if the other man is okay, until something catches his attention. Amidst the dense black smoke from the explosion, there is no one, only a crack in the wall. Gerard observes the crack and looks outside in search of Ludger. As he scans his surroundings, he notices something and widens his eyes. He sees the skin on his face peeling off easily. At that moment, he begins laughing hysterically, saying he spent a lot of money on this. The man removes his disguise as an old man, revealing his true face, a young, long-haired man. He then questions why these incidents always happen around him. He remarks that he didn't have a strong reason to use the alias Machiavelli. He just wanted a famous name in his past life. Due to being involved in various incidents, he had to change his identity multiple times. Machiavelli was just one of his many names, a period of hectic and irritating days. His actions attracted unwanted attention for someone living in hiding. It was exhausting. However, the princess's faction was too busy celebrating their victory to notice his new disguise. Our protagonist, disguised as Gerard, was traveling to Line de Bruneau on a magic train. However, he hadn't expected the train robbery incident to occur and ruin everything. Now he tosses Gerard's fake face aside while observing the hole left in the train. Additionally, he wishes that Mr. Ludger, who perished due to the bomb, may rest in peace. He hadn't anticipated this outcome, someone detonating a bomb while being electrocuted. After all, common thieves don't do things like that. A fanatical mind seeking more than money, wanting to destroy the entire train. As he asks if the passengers are okay, we see the train's conductor still at the controls. In shock, the conductor doesn't understand what happened in the fourth pavilion. He explains that a thief detonated a bomb and that the first carriage is likely their target. The conductor states that he was in the process of evacuating the passengers. Sensing that the man was becoming suspicious, the protagonist swiftly kicks him down. Grabbing him by the neck, the protagonist asks if he really thought he'd fall for that trick. They say the invaders waited for a specific train to pass through the treacherous mountain ranges. Since the magical protection was damaged, they would need help from someone inside the train. Quickly, the train's conductor shifts his expression from fear to anger, furrowing his brows. Stealthily, he pulls a dagger from under his sleeve, but the protagonist grabs his hand. Immobilizing the man, he questions their objectives and who they are. Standing up and holding the man in place, our hero threatens to end him with his own dagger. As the conductor screams, the protagonist senses something strange lingering in the air. Hearing an unusual sound, his eyes widen and he immediately understands what it is. Reacting on instinct, he pushes the conductor in front of him. At that moment, a barrage of scorching bullets riddles the conductor, turning him into a sieve. Dodging swiftly, the protagonist cannot tell whether they gave a signal to fire or not. Afterward, the person who fired the bullets kicks the door, effortlessly breaking it open. At this point, several masked invaders wonder how anyone could still be alive after those shots. Our protagonist asks the man who he thinks he is to speak of life and death. All the men shout at him and prepare to unleash a storm of bullets. However, the protagonist gives them a strange look, and suddenly, they find themselves unable to pull the trigger. In shock, the men struggle to fire their weapons, unable to comprehend what is happening, until one of them looks at the long-haired man and realizes he is a mage. Meanwhile, he is already preparing a spell in the shape of gears. The invaders understand. He used magic to disable their weapons. Before he can unleash his spell, an impact cancels the protagonist's magic. Stunned by the sudden cancellation, he realizes there is another mage on the train, allied with the bandits. A masked figure wielding a staff appears, and the bandits demand the protagonist surrender for a less painful end. Even though he seems strong, he must be a rank 4 mage, just like the protagonist. If he were stronger, Ludger would have heard of him. It has already been 10 minutes since the explosion, and the train will take time to pass through Arete Mountain. This means the support troops will take a while to arrive. He cannot rely on them. Suddenly cornered, the protagonist leaps off the moving train. The bandits are stunned by his impulsive action and send one of their men to check. The masked mage looks outside the train but sees nothing unusual. He tells his boss that the man must have jumped out of sheer fear. However, the bandit is swiftly eliminated, and the mage realizes the protagonist is on top of the train. They wonder if he used flight magic and if it is even humanly possible to keep up with the train using it. He orders some men to go after him while others proceed to carriage no. 1. Some bandits begin firing their heavy weapons at the train's roof, trying to hit him. As the protagonist runs across the top of the train, the men follow his movement from inside. When they reach the rear carriage, one of the men opens the door leading to that section. At that moment, a trap is triggered. The door erupts into flames. The survivors wonder how he managed to set up a trap in such a short time. One bandit remarks that this mage is unlike any other. His movements are precise and efficient. He says the man seems more like a hunter or a mercenary ordinary than a traditional mage. Unexpectedly, a strange noise echoes, and everyone's eyes widen in shock. The criminal mage exclaims. The protagonist has separated the train cars and escaped along the top. He scolds himself for not predicting this. Now the protagonist does not even need to fight them. Rushing back toward their carriage, the train continues accelerating through the mountain ranges. Frustrated, the criminals search for the man outside, but they have lost sight of him. Now they feel obligated to proceed with their train mission, refusing to back down because of him. Saying he has memorized the protagonist's appearance, the criminal mage seems obsessed. He declares that they must find him and eliminate him once and for all. However, as he speaks, he suddenly senses something strange, a powerful wave of energy appearing out of nowhere. Everyone is utterly shocked, questioning the origin of this surge of mana. Standing before them is the long-haired man, a massive spell prepared in his hand. With an intimidating expression, he raises his hand toward them, ready to unleash his magic. With no time to react, the spell is released. The criminals realize too late that they have fallen into another trap. The gear-shaped magic is launched with immense force, engulfing everything in a brilliant flash of light. Holding onto his magic for a moment, the criminal mage orders his comrades to run immediately. Using his arm and magical ability, he attempts to counter the protagonist's spell, until the magic finally ends, leaving all the bandits collapsed on the ground, smoke rising from their body. As our hero wonders if it's over, he notices the mage still standing, alive, but missing something. The mage then questions the protagonist about why he is eliminating his group. He asks if he feels any remorse for doing this, considering his comrades had lent their strength to this world. Highly irritated, the protagonist says he never expected the bandits to be so insane. Filled with anger, he states that they were the ones who tried to eliminate him first, and it's absurd to expect sympathy afterward. He asks the protagonist if he's really going to keep spouting nonsense in front of those who have already fallen. Since they were the ones hunting him down, the long-haired man asks who he is to pass judgment on him. Of course, at first, the protagonist's plan was simply to escape the train. However, that changed when the bandits saw his true face without a disguise. He knows they would have come after him later, and eliminating them now will bring peace to his future. Before the bandit can ask who he is, an ice spell is cast, eliminating him. However, Ludger is caught off guard by the sudden arrival of someone clad in metallic attire. A person wearing elegant clothes, along with armor and a white cape, appears in the carriage. She asks if the protagonist is alright and tells him that, despite the hardships, he should relax now. Confidently, the woman declares that the Cold Steel Knights have arrived, and everything will be fine. The bandits are shocked to realize that the knights arrived using flight magic despite the harsh weather. As the criminals fire their weapons, the Cold Steel Knights defend themselves with magic. In an instant, the knights prepare their magic and charge at the armed thieves. Beneath their masks, the criminals reveal expressions of sheer terror in the face of the knight. The last thing they see is a Cold Steel Knight striking them with a powerful spell. After that, a flash of light erupts, followed by a deafening sound, bringing an end to the criminals in that carriage. Communicating through earpieces, the knights systematically clear the train cars, eliminating the bandits. Reporting to her comrades, the vice captain announces that all the carriages are now secure. Thanking her men for their service, she orders them to escort the passengers to the next station. And so, the passengers disembark at Leithavelk station. Seated in his new spot, the protagonist is approached by the vice captain, who asks if he is alright. He responds that he is fine, and thanks to the knight's help, was unharmed by the train terrorists. Apologizing for the delayed introduction, the vice captain states that her name is Veronica DeVille. Before the protagonist can introduce himself, someone calls out for Veronica, diverting her attention. They ask DeVille if she is the one in command of the knights, and she confirms that she is the vice captain. The man then introduces himself as Officer Remius from the city's police department. He questions the vice captain about the attack on the train in the Arret Mountains. Veronica states that they have eliminated all the terrorists involved, and Remius thanks her for her service. However, there is something in the report that does not make sense, and he wishes to question DeVille about it. He explains that the train was taken over too quickly, and the intruders managed to bypass magical security with ease. Because of this, they suspect that someone inside the train helped the terrorists. Thoughtful, Veronica DeVille remarks that it does make sense, even if it's just a theory. Remius says that once they identify the person responsible, he will order a full investigation. DeVille asks the protagonist if he overheard their conversation and assures him that if he is honest, he will have no problem. Despite maintaining a calm and composed smile on the outside, the protagonist internally realizes this is bad. There is nothing wrong with Gerard's train ticket. He bought it and boarded in a completely legal and normal manner. The problem is his face. He doesn't look like a man in his 40s. If they investigate him, they will quickly discover that he was using a false identity. Most likely, the protagonist would end up hanged or tortured, if he's lucky. Escaping is not an option, as there are too many police officers and knights stationed outside the train. On top of that, Vice Captain Veronica seems like the type to be especially ruthless with criminals. At this moment, she is smiling and acting friendly toward him, but that will change if they start suspecting him. Remius asks if he is alright and mentions that it took a while to obtain the passenger list. He tells him not to be nervous as they are merely verifying identity. entities. Remius asks for the man's train ticket, and he promptly hands it over. Together with the train worker, they check cabin 403, confirming that Gerard and Ludger were there. Remius asks the protagonist where the other man is, and he responds that he was killed in the explosion. They say this happened while the train was passing through the Arret Mountains, and he fell off the cliff. Officer Remius seems to be assessing the information given to him, while the protagonist swallows hard in shock. At that moment, Veronica appears and states that this man should not be considered a suspect. She explains that he was fighting against the terrorists before the knights even arrived on the train. She questions why he would do that if he were working with the criminals. Remius is stunned by the revelation that he fought against the criminals and apologizes to him. At that moment, Remius addresses the protagonist as Ludger and asks if he was hired by Serin Academy. Both of them look at Ludger differently now, seeing a new gleam in him because of this. Grabbing his suitcase and offering a smile, the protagonist confirms that he was hired to work at Serin. Introducing himself as Ludger Chelsy, he states that he is the new professor they recruited. Remius apologizes to him, but Ludger thanks them for the comfort they provided during the journey to Serin. The officer offers to escort Ludger to Serin Academy, but he declines, saying he will go alone. He adds that he is a man who will teach the future generations of the Empire and that he wants to help. However, it would be worse for our protagonist if he were escorted by the police and the knights. He explains that he needs to handle personal matters elsewhere and appreciates the offer. Taking his leave, he thanks them for the brief but pleasant meeting. Veronica DeVille thanks him as well, saying she hopes to meet him again soon. Swiftly, Ludger, the master of disguises, vanishes into the crowd. Walking along through the streets, he feels relieved to have shaken off the police and the knights. Internally, he apologizes to the deceased Ludger, but after all, he helped him escape this situation. He is grateful that phototechnology in this world is weak. After all, no one can distinguish him from Ludger in a photograph. He believes everything will be fine now and decides to hide and create a new identity. Until someone suddenly calls out to Ludger Chelsy, saying they saw him speaking with the knights earlier. An old man introduces himself as an employee of Serin Academy and says his name is Wilford. Relieved that the man is safe, he explains that he came to retrieve him after the train attack. With no other choice, Ludger enters Wilford's horse-driven carriage, though this one runs on mechanical gears, heading to Serin. Seated on the luxurious red couch of the carriage, Ludger appears deep in thought. He realizes this is not good. After all, they sent someone to pick him up who is no ordinary employee. Beyond his strong appearance, Ludger never sensed his presence approaching. At the very least, this man was once a knight. Ludger knows that if he tries to dodge this with weak excuses, he will be suspicious, and Wilford will pursue him. He decides to act calmly. After all, he is practically a ghost in this country now that Gerard is deceased. So even if he were taken somewhere, no one would notice his disappearance. For him, it is much better to maintain this solid image and fully assume Ludger's persona. Suddenly, they arrive at Serin Academy, and the gates open for the carriage to enter. He is introduced to Serin Academy, a monumental and breathtaking place with a grand central garden. In shock, the protagonist asks if everything he sees truly belongs to Serin Academy. Wilford states that he will take Ludger directly to the Academy's director and asks him to leave his luggage with him. Ludger stands before a massive structure resembling a white castle. Upon entering, they step into a vast hall adorned with exquisite ornaments on the floor. Our hero introduces himself to the director as Ludger Chelsy, saying he has come because he was summoned. At a distant table, a woman sits, her expression dark and complex. Serin Academy's director, Elisa Willow, says she has eagerly awaited Ludger's arrival. Elisa asks if Ludger is alright after the attack, to which he replies that it was nothing, the knights helped him. She is pleased that he is well. After all, the Academy's reputation would have been affected if he had been harmed. Ludger notices that the director seems a little unhinged, openly talking about the Academy's reputation. In reality, our master of disguises has felt a bad sensation since earlier. He wonders if Elisa has not yet realized that he is not who he claims to be, and if she ever actually met the real Ludger. Elisa Willow remarks that Ludger is quite handsome and notes that this is their first time meeting in person. He thanks her for the compliment, and she says the students will be quite rebellious at the start of the year. The director hands Ludger a document. Even though she had already informed him before, she decides to be cautious. Willow guarantees a 2-year contract with the agreed-upon salary, as well as food and housing. Reading the contract, the protagonist goes through it but is already planning to leave as soon as possible. He is shocked to read that the salary is 30 imperial gold coins, in the current currency of the continent, that amounts to 30 million dinars, or $300,000. The woman asks Ludger what he thinks of the contract and reassures him that it is quite generous. On the outside, Ludger appears calm and says it seems good, but internally, it feels like he won the lottery. This means that the expectations for a professor at Serin Academy are extremely high. Ludger Chelsy decides to adapt to this environment to meet the Academy's expectations. Even with so many geniuses gathered in this place, the important thing is that his job is already secured. It would be highly suspicious if he refused the job after coming all the way to Serin. He knows he has no choice but to accept, and after that, deceive and manipulate people, which is his specialty. Ludger then states that he has reviewed the contract and finds it perfect, with no need for changes. He has real-life experience and no shortage of theoretical knowledge, making him confident in pretending to be someone decent. Willow extends her hand, saying she looks forward to working with Professor Ludger Chelsy. Shaking the hand of director Elisa Willow, The protagonist says the feeling is mutual. Ludger knows he only needs to endure this life for 2 years, and then he will finally be a free man. Night falls, and the full moon illuminates the rooms of Serin Academy. Ludger has 3 weeks until the start of classes, and knows that's enough time to prepare. He even finds it amusing that they wanted to rent an entire house just for him. Relaxing in his room, the reality of his new life and identity as a professor sets in. He also recalls that it has been 27 years since he reincarnated into this world. Reborn without any special abilities, only carrying the memories of his past life. In his previous life, he had to survive alone due to his negligent parents. He endured many hardships and never would have imagined becoming a professor at Serin. Ludger Chelsy comments that this is essentially a disguise he was forced to take on. He mentions that he needed a new persona, and Ludger happened to be in the perfect position for identity theft. After all, he was a fallen noble from a small kingdom, an only child with deceased parents. The letters he received in life seemed purely formal, with no signs of personal connection or friendship, which means no one will recognize his disguise. There is no identity better than this. The only thing Ludger lacks now is information about Serin and the content of its lessons. Before he can do anything else, his stomach growls with hunger. He decides to leave those matters for tomorrow and goes in search of a restaurant. Time passes, and we see Ludger sitting in a cafe with a cup of coffee in hand. He then realizes that 2 weeks have already gone by, during which he finished pending matters and prepared his lessons. With only 1 week left before classes start, he needs to put everything into practice. Seeing that it's almost time for customers to arrive, he decides to prepare more lessons, until someone arrives and sits behind him, saying they are glad he is safe. A hooded person says they were worried something bad might have happened to him. Shocked without saying a word, the protagonist continues sipping his coffee. He asks why they didn't make contact in the past 2 weeks, then adds that the members are curious about the whereabouts of Sir First Order. Without understanding what the man is talking about, the master of disguise remains silent. The person then says they needed to confirm something and realizes that these people really were looking for him. In truth, they were searching for the man named Ludger Chelsy, the identity he gets stolen. Nervously, the hooded figure says the train terrorism incident was an accident. They didn't know the rebels would attack, and Ludger states that he needs information about Serin. Shocked, the person asks if they didn't send him any information at all. The long-haired man replies that he was just verifying whether the information given to him was correct. Internally, the protagonist is confused, trying to understand who these people are. He decides to go along with the flow without raising suspicion about his disguise, and asks if they completed their mission. The hooded man states that before arriving, they eliminated all key figures in the academy, and that they disposed of the traitors within the organization, who were brutally executed and fed to dogs. Hearing this, the protagonist realizes just how bad this situation is, and what Ludger was involved in. Ludger becomes tense, and the man apologizes for not verifying the details sooner. Trying to remain calm and maintain appearances, he asks why the man suddenly came looking for him. Answering Ludger, the man says the reason was his sudden disappearance for half a month. Ludger responds with anger, asking if the man decided to act on his own during such crucial times. Shocked by Ludger's tone, the man apologizes, but Chelsy orders him to stay quiet. Slamming his teacup onto the table, he says that the man's suspicious attire was already irritating him. He asks if the man wants to appear even more suspicious, and notices how he reacts excessively to every action he makes. This person is clearly afraid of the man known as Ludger Chelsy, as evident from his reactions. Deciding to check the member count, Ludger asks how many people have gathered so far. The purple-haired man responds that 31 Second Order members and 7 Third Order members have successfully infiltrated. The First Order members arrived earlier and have already prepared his plan. Ludger acknowledges this and tells them to stand up now that he has confirmed the count. In response, the man states that for the next meeting, they can proceed to the pre-designated location. Ludger intimidates him, questioning if a lower being is giving him orders to come and go as he pleases. Suddenly, the man starts trembling in absolute fear of Ludger and begs for forgiveness. Ludger declares that he will decide when their next meeting takes place and that only people like him can arrange such gatherings. Still shaking, the man asks if people like him belong to Order Zero. Agreeing with his subordinate, Ludger tells him not to bother him with such trivial details. Turning his back and leaving, he internally realizes that these people are extremely dangerous. Beyond eliminating key figures within the academy, he wonders what they have done with the traitors. As he exits the location, the hooded man suddenly asks him to wait. Nervous, Ludger hesitates but decides to listen to what the purple-haired man has to say. The man questions when Ludger will summon them again and how he intends to issue the call. Internally, our protagonist is confused. He never thought that far ahead. Threatening the man in a passive-aggressive manner, he asks if he really needs to answer that. Finally, Ludger returns to his room and begins researching his assumed identity. He discovers that Ludger Chelsy is a fallen aristocrat with no family ties. He is also recorded as the fastest to reach rank 4 and a professor at Serin. Irritated, the protagonist thinks that he should have suspected this much earlier. The reason Ludger was such an idealistic man was that he was merely a persona created for that purpose. After all, he could not use his real identity to infiltrate the academy. The letters he sent and received under the identity of Ludger Chelsy were actually coded messages. Realizing the depth and complexity of this situation, the protagonist's mind becomes overwhelmed. He cannot believe that the impulsive path he chose has led him directly into the eye of a storm. Reading through the letters, he notes that Ludger corresponded in unciphered messages using the Kyoto language. He has doubts due to the strange writing, but beyond that, the real problem lies with the First Order. Infiltrating Serin Academy as a professor and being favored in the selection process is beyond bizarre. He knows that more instructions will be sent, and Serin is not the only concern on his mind right now. The more he thinks about this situation, the more absurd it becomes, giving him a severe headache. The story of an executive from a secret organization dying in a terrorist attack is utterly ridiculous. Ludger was an executive of a secret society that planted dozens of spies in Serin. A man like him should have survived both the train hijacking and the terrorist attack. Then he realizes it is pointless to complain to ghosts. However, this means he must now conceal both his identity and an entire secret society. Reflecting on this, the long-haired man thinks that contacting the organization today might be a good idea. From what he has learned, the organization is divided into 4 orders, starting from Order 0. However, he has no leads on Order 0, though he can confirm their existence. Discovering who was sent by the order is now the most critical thing for Ludger. If that person was an acquaintance of the real Ludger, they might recognize that he is an imposter. But for now, the protagonist's top priority is simply ensuring that his disguise remains undiscovered. Orchestrating things so that Serin itself eliminates the order on his behalf is the ideal scenario in his mind. After all, Serin has power, and the society would not stand a chance against them if they decided to act. He also needs to provide just enough information to avoid being caught by either side. Just thinking about the tightrope he is walking to keep both organizations satisfied already exhausts him. Even though he is drained, he knows he cannot afford to waste these next 2 years. The sun rises over the beautiful and grand Serin Academy, with students gathering in the hallways conversing. In the vast classroom of Serin, students begin to take their seats. The students discuss the arrival of the new professor for their subject in the 2nd year, calling him skilled. They don't believe it was a planned replacement since the previous professor resigned suddenly. The students gossip about an incident where a student cornered the professor in front of everyone. A friend tells Flora that people are talking about her, but she wonders what she did wrong. She comments that, as a student, she only wanted to point out that the professor's magical technique was incorrect. The students mention that he is quite sophisticated and has written several theses as a military officer. An excited student remarks that, on top of that background, he is also a fallen aristocrat. Everyone is disappointed, assuming it will be easy to get good grades with this professor. Suddenly, interrupting all the chatter, the professor enters the room with confidence. Slamming his hand on the desk, he introduces himself, saying it's a pleasure to meet them and that his name is Ludger. The entire classroom falls silent, startled by his sudden and unexpected arrival. He explains that, since they are in a course correction period, he won't start the subject immediately. However, he warns them right away that he will be teaching spellcasting, with a focus on practice rather than theory. Additionally, the class will not be exclusive to 2nd-year students. Freshmen will also be included. He tells everyone to quiet down, acknowledging their complaints but making it clear that he will not make the lessons easier. A student raises a hand and asks why freshmen are allowed to attend the class as well. The student in question is a blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl with an air of aristocratic arrogance, someone who looks familiar to him. He responds that his duty as an educator is to teach everyone equally, regardless of their grade level. She acknowledges that his class is different from the standard format, asks for a more detailed explanation. Ludger replies that it wouldn't be fun if he told them everything now and advises her to attend the lessons to satisfy her curiosity. However, he decides to address those who think they will get easy grades just because he is a new professor. He warns them that they will regret thinking that way, because it is his role as a teacher, and for those who hold such expectations, he kindly asks them not to attend his class. Of course, he has prepared his lessons, but the fewer students he has to teach, the better. If 2nd-year students have to attend classes with freshmen, it will hurt their pride. Besides, who would voluntarily join his class after hearing that it will be difficult? Ludger then concludes his introduction and asks if anyone has questions. The students feel the weight of the intense atmosphere created by a former military officer. They also remember that he is the youngest person to ever reach rank 4. Even though they have plenty of doubts, no one has the courage to ask anything. Before a girl can speak, Ludger decides to end his introductory session. As he leaves, he is surprised that not even trivial questions about himself were asked. This is a positive outcome for him, but it also means the answers he had prepared were useless. Then he considers the possibility that they might all be deliberately ignoring him. Overthinking, he wonders if he should have been friendlier and less intimidating. Lost in thought about this, he suddenly notices his students surrounding him. It was just a private theory of his, but it turns out to be true. A pink-haired girl gently introduces herself to her professor, saying her name is Selena. Selena mentions that she is a new professor just like Ludger, and he greets her politely. Then, with a friendly tone, she asks if Professor Ludger has already had lunch. After being introduced to Selena, he meets Bruno, the professor of Golan Summoning. Marilda also introduces herself as the professor of hallucinations, covering curses and dispelling magic. Ludger Chelsy introduces himself to them as the professor of spellcasting. One of the female professors compliments the long-haired man, saying he is even more handsome up close. A blue-haired man wearing glasses glances at Ludger with an odd expression before turning his head away when noticed. Marilda introduces him as Professor Chris Benamor, noting that he is clearly a noble. Ludger realizes that among the new professors, there is one fallen noble, one noble still still in good standing, and 3 commoners. He observes that they all occupy very different places in the social hierarchy, yet they are all highly skilled. This means there is a high chance that someone from the First Order is hiding among them. He acknowledges that he cannot trust his colleagues, something about all of them feels off. Chris suddenly declares that he can't stand being here any longer, saying he had wondered what the new professors would be like. He scoffs at the fact that there is only one fallen noble and a bunch of commoners, stating that he wants no part in their group. He also tells Ludger not to act like a noble when he is nothing more than a fallen one. Marilda interjects, saying that even though Chris is nobility, he doesn't have to behave that way, and she asks Ludger not to take it personally. Ludger calls all the teachers to eat without him, and Bruno loves the idea. Ludger reflects that he should be satisfied for not eating alone as usual. Night finally falls over the academy, and we see a kind of glowing blue magic circle in a room. Someone asks if they've heard about the new professor, Ludger Chelsy. They mention the rumors that he is the youngest to reach rank 4 and has experience as a military officer. They also say that he helped in the cryptid hunt and even inscribed his name in a magic tower. The girl with her hand on the blue circle asks if all of this is true. Thinking to herself, she realizes she can't interfere with Mr. First Order's class. In fact, she wants to bring as many students as possible to Ludger's lessons. A boy uses magic to communicate and asks if a first-year student can enroll in his class. The other students, communicating through magic, find this fascinating and consider enrolling as well. Time passes and Ludger walks through the corridors, finally ready to give his first lecture. He wonders how many students stayed in the classroom after he warned them that the lessons would be difficult. He imagines that those who showed up did so because they had no other choice, not out of genuine interest. Ludger assumes that, at most, 30 students will remain in his class while the other rooms will be overcrowded. The students whisper among themselves before the professor arrives, and then he finally enters the classroom. Our protagonist is shocked when he sees the number of students in the room. He notices that all 80 seats are occupied and wonders why the class is so full. Not to mention, most of the room consists of first-year students, and they already seem to respect him in advance. Ludger wonders if they don't feel pressured by taking lessons alongside upperclassmen. He suspects that girl manipulated things to make this happen, or maybe he just underestimated the students and their determination. Chelsy knows that Serin Academy gathers the best and strongest young minds on the continent. He realizes that he has triggered their competitive nature and acknowledges that he has no choice. He decides to introduce himself again for the sake of the new students, stating that he is a professor of spellcasting. He knows he will have to work hard, and the lesson begins with a question about the 4 specialization processes. With a stern expression, Ludger states that questions are only allowed when he permits them. He warns that from now on, anyone who disobeys his orders will have their points deducted. Of course, there will also be opportunities to earn bonus points based on their effort. Answering the student's question, he says that he will be teaching the 4 main specializations. The 4 specializations include release, elemental property, telekinesis, and reinforcement. It is usually difficult to teach even 2 of these, yet he is expected to teach all 4 as a new professor. A blue-haired girl judges Ludger, thinking that what he wants to do is pure exaggeration. Taking advantage of the fact that this is his first class, Ludger decides to show them something impressive. He presents a rank 3 fire-based elemental spell called Flickering Flames. It works by using release to trigger combustion, then compressing, expanding, and accelerating it. 7 different components interconnect to form this flame spell. What Ludger intends to show them is a way to cast the spell 3 times faster. The students question whether it is really possible to reduce a spell's casting time. A blonde girl asks if Flora thinks this is a lie, and she replies that she doesn't think it's possible. There is the scroll method, which stores spells in a component. There is also memory reverberation, but it has clear limitations. Flora states that if Ludger uses either of those 2 methods, she will be very disappointed in him. Assuming the students must be full of questions, Ludger opens the floor for them. Many students, both first and second years, flood him with questions. They ask if he modified the spell's technique, to which he responds that changing a technique creates an entirely new spell. He will demonstrate the technique as it is but will reduce its casting time. Raising her hand, the blue-haired girl firmly states that this is impossible. Our protagonist observes her with cold composure and confidence in his gaze. The blue-haired girl introduces herself as Flora Lumos, a second-year student. The other students take notice. Flora has finally spoken up, seemingly intent on challenging the professor. Ludger Chelsy questions the girl, asking why she believes this is so impossible. Current formulas claim that the only way to achieve this is through repetition and proficiency. She points out that the professor is trying to teach something that not even the greatest geniuses can accomplish. The long-haired man questions the possibility that they could improve, but they simply don't want to. Causing confusion, he explains that magic has stagnated because it remains too focused on traditions. Due to scientific advancements, magic's position in the world has been threatened. Ludger clarifies that he is not advocating for the supremacy of science, but insists that magic can improve. Thus, he states that Flora is mistaken and that he must be the first to enhance magic. Shocked, Flora asks if he really means what he's saying, thinking he is way too arrogant. Finding it difficult to explain, he decides to demonstrate and asks if they know the average casting time for this spell. Flora responds that it depends on rank, but the average ranges from 10 seconds to 5 seconds. Ludger states that he dislikes thinking in terms of mage ranks and prefers methods tailored to his students. Flora then confirms that the average is about 5 seconds and confidently claims she can do it even faster. The professor notices her strong confidence and asks her to demonstrate it in front of the class. Convinced, she stands up confidently to showcase the spell to the entire classroom. The blue-haired girl waves her wand, and the flickering flame begins to form. Within seconds, the fire spell's magic circle appears in the air. The students are shocked by the speed of her casting, but they expected this from a member of the Lumos family. Ludger counts 4.78 seconds as her casting time, an absurd speed for a second-year student. He acknowledges that the process was flawless but still too slow, shaking Flora's confidence. The fastest recorded time for a rank 3 mage was 4.41 seconds, and she is still too slow. Our protagonist also declares that 4.4 seconds is still too slow. The class is stunned by this statement, wondering just how fast he can cast the spell. Telling the class to pay close attention, he says he will demonstrate how to cast Flickering Flame. The moment he picks up his wand, Flora realizes that his movement does not match this particular spell. In an instant, the spell is complete, leaving everyone in absolute shock. The students are left speechless. He didn't even take a full second to cast the spell. Flora realizes there was no visible process in his casting of the fire spell. Asking if everyone saw that, Ludger Chelsy says he will demonstrate again for anyone who missed it. Once again, he casts the spell instantly, taking less than a second. The entire class is left speechless, reacting with astonishment as Ludger observes their expressions. Checking the clock, Ludger states that it took him 0.24 seconds to cast the spell. This is a drastic difference from the current record for Flickering Flame. Flora finds it strange because, in his first casting, the technique wasn't the standard Flickering Flame. Ludger explains that he used one spell to accelerate the casting of another, impressing the students. By providing the conditions, he triggers the pre-selected results instantly, a method similar to a programming diagram. Using the biological hardware known as a mage, consuming data called mana, and following a program known as technique, the software, which is magic, is activated. This is what our protagonist calls source code, something Flora has never heard of before. Ludger Chelsy asks if Flora Lumova's question has been answered, and she confirms that it has. He then states that she interrupted his class without permission because she had not overcome her own biases. He asks if she admits her mistake, and with some difficulty, the girl acknowledges it. The professor states that Flora's actions were an unjustifiable challenge to his authority. Therefore, Flora Lumos receives a 10-point penalty, shocking her friend with the harsh punishment. Flora seems to hold back tears as she turns to return to her seat, like a spoiled child. However, since her Flickering Flame technique was flawless, he rewards her with 10 points. After all, he does not dislike skilled students, and her technique was commendable. Flora thanks Ludger. The students feel relieved upon realizing that the penalty points were cancelled out. Cheryl asks if Flora Lumos is okay, and she responds that she is, thanking her friend for her concern. Her friend is impressed by how quickly Flora recovered from the scolding and penalty. However, internally, Flora seems to be struggling with a mental conflict, remaining silent in deep thought. After all this, Ludger Chelsy removes his coat and announces that the lesson will officially begin now. He says he will select a few students capable of keeping up with the lesson to teach them about source code. Finally, he tells the entire class that if they want to learn, they must work hard for it. The entire classroom is impressed. They had expected a terrible class due to the rumors about Ludger. The students are surprised by the quality of the lesson, which upholds the prestigious standards of Serin Academy. Some time passes and Professor Ludger decides to end the lesson at this advanced point. He tells everyone they can leave the class and review the material covered in the lesson. Impressed by the technique of the source code, the students can't stop talking about the class. A snobby aristocrat mocks the students who were amazed, calling them stupid. The arrogant blonde noble sneers, saying that this is exactly why commoners like them are worthless. The student who was the target of his rude comments hadn't even realized the blonde was talking about him. Annoyed, the rich boy asks if the commoner is mocking him, but the student says he would never do that. Furious, he demands to know how a mere commoner dares to ignore Jevin, the first son of Baron Filio. Leo questions whether Filio's barony isn't located in the outskirts of the Empire. Becoming even pettier, Jevin asks if Serin is accepting just any child nowadays. Leo responds that it's still better than accepting the foolish child of a childish baron's family. Overcome with rage, Jevin starts preparing a spell, insulted by the boy's words. Leo simply looks at him with disdain from head to toe and tells him to try his luck. The boy taunts Jevin, daring him to cast his spell now and see what happens. Even as a noble, it's unlikely that he would get away with it so easily. He asks if Jevin even read the rules upon entering. He points out that Jevin shouted without realizing that the room was still full of people. Completely enraged, Jevin grits his teeth and looks around. The foolish aristocrat storms off, leaving with a veiled threat that the boy should be prepared for what's coming. Grateful, the bespectacled student introduces himself as Aiden to the blue-haired boy. Leo introduces himself and says there's no need for thanks. He simply got irritated with Jevin for acting like a typical noble. Aiden ignores what Leo says and excitedly declares that he's the best in the world, thrilled to be in his presence. Leo decides to leave, but Aiden insists on following him, even without knowing where he's headed. Aiden notices Leo carrying an alchemy book and says that he also takes that class. Only half interested, the blue-haired boy tells Aiden to do whatever he wants. He also warns the four-eyed boy not to make that kind of gesture again, but Aiden doesn't understand. He asks if he meant counter signals or the gestures of someone who hasn't properly learned magic yet. Leo tells him he needs to understand how things work in Serin because second-year students have a solid foundation. He gives the example of Flora Lumos, the student who stood out in class today, so Aiden can get a better idea. He adds that her personality is terrifying and warns the bespectacled boy to stay away from her. There are rumors in Serin that the last spellcasting professor left because of her. Another example is the Imperial Noble, the third princess, Elendil von Exilian. Leo warns that nothing good happens to commoners like them who try to speak with her. And finally, there's the person who leads the noble faction among the second years, Freuden Wolberg. Aiden asks if he means the Wolberg family, one of the three richest and most powerful ducal houses. Leo confirms it, stating that they view commoners as nothing more than insects. It's best to avoid them. And Jevin, the idiot they had just dealt with, is part of that faction and has now marked Aiden. Aiden says he doesn't care about them, and the other boy can't tell if he's brave or just insane. The blue-haired boy mentions that there are a few more nobles Aiden should avoid, and he'll explain along the way. As they talk, a white-haired man with a noble appearance watches them closely. Meanwhile, Ludger walks through the corridors, reflecting on his lesson, noting that it went much better than he expected. He comments to himself that the structure of this world resembles 19th century Earth. Even with the existence of magic, many things are still lacking compared to the 21st century and advanced science. That was the reason he tried to combine magic and science, creating the concept of source code. And he never expected the class to react so positively to it. When his master first saw what he had created, his evaluation only confirmed the theory, nothing more. He had said that Ludger could use magic faster, but he was still limited to rank 3, and creating magic was incredibly difficult. Ludger knows he can't keep using the source code technique too frequently, or else he'll be discovered. Stopping in front of an ornate door, he wonders if this is his personal office. Opening the door, he is met with a massive room, and a white-haired girl inside. She welcomes the professor and asks if he likes the elegant interior of the office. Serin guarantees personal space for professors where they can do as they please. Impressed by this information, Ludger asks the woman what she does in her own office. She asks if she wasn't allowed to enter, and he replies that he is simply curious about the reason for her visit. The director states that Ludger is a valuable professor at Serin, and that special attention should be given to him. As he makes eye contact with the director's piercing gaze, Ludger's entire body trembles. She questions his cold reaction, expecting surprise, though he has already been surprised enough today. Reflecting, he knows that even if he encountered a ghost at midnight, he wouldn't be as startled. The director says that the other professors were astonished by Ludger's abilities. Ludger wonders if she visited the other professors' offices as she did with his, trying to understand her motive. Perhaps she has noticed something about his secrets. Even though it is a secret society, if someone becomes the director, they will notice strange movements within Serin. Ludger considers the possibility that she has realized something and is now suspicious of him. However, that would be unfair. After all, the real Ludger was part of the society, but he is not. She mentions that she heard he accepted many students, and he responds that he didn't want to exclude anyone based on their academic year. The director wasn't criticizing him. In fact, she even agrees with his approach. After all, there are some incredible students in the first year, including one who uses unusual magic. She asks him to avoid trouble, especially since the princess is in his class. She doesn't require special treatment, but it would be problematic if anything happened to her. Ludger is surprised by this news, and the director tells him she has high expectations for him. She is also pleased that he successfully completed his first class, and that the students gave him a positive evaluation. Ludger offers her tea, and the director appreciates the gesture, but says she still has many matters to attend to. As she leaves, she asks Ludger Chelsy to take care of himself from now on. Outside, an old man asks her how it went and whether Ludger is trustworthy. The director responds honestly that she doesn't know and is keeping an eye on the two most suspicious individuals. However, she hasn't reached any conclusions yet, and the old man remarks that if she's here, there must be a reason. Confirming this, she states that even after using her evil eye, Vescania, on him twice, she never imagined that he would remain completely unaffected by it. Reflecting on it, she knows that if he were truly rank 4, he should have fallen for Vescania's trick. Yet without showing any reaction, he endured it solely through sheer determination. The director asserts that he is indeed a very remarkable man, thinking about the train incident involving terrorism and the group hiding within Serin. She feels that she can't afford to overlook even trivial matters. She considers the possibility that the train attack was merely a distraction and that Ludger was replaced. She asks Mr. Wolford for his thoughts on this theory, and even without certainty, the old man admits that Ludger is unusual. Although it is based on an old man's intuition, the director acknowledges that he has an excellent judgment of people. She concludes that she needs to observe the professor for a longer period to understand his true nature. In his private office, Ludger Chelsy is exhausted, slumped on the sofa. Frustrated, Ludger knows that it wasn't a friendly conversation, it was an interrogation. Even though he is anxious, he knows he hasn't done anything suspicious and decides to continue his mission. Reading about Flora, he hopes her family won't pressure him over the classroom incident. He reasons that she has no reason to take it personally. He even gave her points to reconcile the situation. He notices many talented individuals, from the foreigner supported by the magic tower to the princess of the empire. Looking at the file of the four-eyed Aiden, he wonders if this is the student with the so-called unusual magic. Ludger realizes that the boy's face looks familiar and thinks he will remember him later. He knows he cannot let his guard down after witnessing how the director was observing him. Caught in a dilemma, he questions whether it would be better to side with the secret society or with Serin. After all, that girl referred to him as Sir First Order and accepted his changed appearance without hesitation. He considers the possibility that the real Ludger was an expert in disguise and infiltration. However, he quickly dismisses the idea, knowing the consequences of aligning himself with the secret society. There is no guarantee that they would protect him, even if he contributed to their organization. For now, the only thing he can do is perform his best as a professor, until suddenly, someone knocks on the door. A courier stands at his door, delivering an official patrol warrant to him. He recalls a clause in his contract that mentioned this, and today, it is Professor Ludger's turn. The postman leaves quickly after delivering the package to Ludger Chelsy's door. Our protagonist does not seem pleased with the idea of having to fulfill a patrol order. Meanwhile, night falls, and we see a training room where a blonde girl is acting aggressively. Another person refuses to leave, stating that it is a shared space that anyone can use. The blonde girl says that if they are bothered, they should be the ones to leave, then insults her by calling her a commoner. In response, the girl asserts that Serin does not classify students based on status or nobility. Dainma scoffs, saying she should not believe words that were only spoken to please commoners. The nobles mock the girl, claiming that poor people are foolish for trying to rise to their level. The girl realizes that no matter what she says, these petty nobles will never listen to her. Dainma then states that after hearing such nonsense, the girl should kneel and beg for forgiveness from the nobles. Turning away, the girl leaves, which infuriates the blonde. How dare a commoner ignore her words? Enraged, the blonde raises her wand and begins casting a spell against the less privileged girl. Blue streaks of energy burst from a magic circle and shoot toward the defenseless girl. The other arrogant nobles watch in shock at Dainma's extreme and impulsive reaction. Terrified, the girl screams, her eyes widening as the magic nears her. But just before the spell can strike, it is disrupted in midair and dissipates. Frustrated, Dainma demands to know who dared to interfere with her spell. A voice asks what exactly they are doing. The person says they can't believe someone is using magic outside the designated training grounds without rules. They call it an unfair attack and question how such a problem could arise so early in the school year. Then we see Ludger, wand in hand, preventing the defenseless girl from being struck. Ludger remarks that Serin must seem ridiculous to them, while the humble girl looks relieved to see him. He would have let it slide with just a warning if it had been mere training, but this was a deliberate attack. Dainma questions why he is interfering, claiming she only acted to protect noble authority. With firm confidence, Ludger states that every student is equal in Serin Academy. No matter how noble one's blood may be, he will not let this go unpunished. He orders Dainma to follow him immediately, and irritated, the girl calls Ludger a fallen noble. The moment the words leave her mouth, fear grips her, and her peers are shocked by what she just said. Professor Ludger turns his face toward her, filled with anger, and asks what she just said. She is completely terrified by Ludger Chelsy's sinister expression and aura. With fury in his voice, he orders the girl to repeat what she just said, and everyone present is paralyzed with fear. Staring at her with an imposing posture, the professor questions if she truly called him a fallen noble. One of the students quickly calls for Professor Selena to de-escalate the situation. Selena, shocked, points at Professor Ludger and yells to get his attention. As Ludger Chelsy stands with his hand raised, Selena shouts for him to stop. However, he merely places his hand on the blonde girl's shoulder. She braces herself for the worst. Ludger calmly says that she is right, leaving everyone confused, including the girl herself. She asks what he means. In response, Ludger states that, as she said, he is nothing more than a fallen aristocrat. However, in Serin, he is a professor, and what she said was a challenge to his authority. Still resting his hand on her shoulder, he asks softly if he is wrong. He adds that, given her young age, it must be difficult for her to accept an unfamiliar environment. Because of that, he will let her insult slide as a warning. However, she will face proper disciplinary consequences for what she did to her fellow student. Ludger turns to Lynn and asks if she was hurt, to which she replies that she wasn't. This relieves the professor. He then leaves the rest of the situation to Professor Selena. As he walks away, Lynn is surprised that Ludger knows her name. After all, she is just a commoner among 80 nobles. He had no reason to pay attention to her. She recalls his words about everyone being equal in Serin. This instills confidence in Lin, who previously thought Ludger was just a scary professor. Now she feels that she can trust him and decides to give her best effort. Night falls, and we see Ludger sitting on a bench, resting his head in his hand, looking troubled. He appears to be in terrible pain and pulls a strange vial from his coat. He places a few pills in his mouth to relieve his discomfort. He thinks that he would be in serious trouble if he didn't have the pills that helped him survive. Annoyed, Ludger wonders why a commotion had to break out at that exact moment. He almost showed a ridiculous appearance and felt the symptoms start when he entered the training center. Even though the initial symptoms were bearable, things got worse in the middle of the discussion. As his condition deteriorated, all he could think about was leaving, until the blonde spoke loudly at the worst possible time. However, in the end, he managed to say something plausible, even though he looked terrible. He has just taken the last pill from his bottle and will be able to endure for another 5 days. But an incident could occur within those 5 days, forcing Ludger to use mana. The problem is that if he gets something from the pharmacy, it will be recorded, which is very dangerous. Ludger Chelsy knows that he must contact a specific person as soon as possible. As the sky brightens and morning arrives at Serin Academy, Selena talks about a werewolf. Ludger is confused and questions Professor Selena while she repeats the word werewolf. She explains that students in Lethavelk saw a shadow walking across the rooftops the night before. Ludger considers it to be a ghost story or urban legend, and Selena agrees with him. Selena adds that there were also witnesses who claim to have seen the same thing inside Serin. She says they might have seen something else, but strange phenomena do happen at Serin. She mentions the 7 ghost stories of Serin and asks if Ludger has heard of them. Ludger asks if those stories are actually real, and she insists that they are. Our hero then comments that Professor Selena seems to love ghost stories. She explains that she researched these stories to discuss them with her students. When she over-explains, insisting that she is not obsessed with them, Ludger tells her to calm down. Marilda then approaches Ludger and brings up the fascinating topic he covered in his first lesson, a groundbreaking magic technique that reduces spellcasting time. She asks for its name. Selena suddenly shouts loudly that it is called source code, making the situation awkward. Now knowing the name, Marilda asks if this magic is really real, and Ludger confirms that it is. Both of them are surprised that a spell can have such a capability to alter magic itself. The other professors sitting in the dining hall turn their attention to Ludger, making him uncomfortable. Marilda states that with the rumor spreading, everyone has become interested in Ludger's spell. As Marilda asks if it would be a problem to demonstrate this spell at the academy, Selena says that he could gain a patent at the magic tower, though Ludger doesn't care about that. Internally, our protagonist knows that it would be best if he didn't get a patent at the magic tower. If he lacks proper backing, his work could be stolen, or worse, he could be harmed. He doesn't know what will happen if the tower gets too close. The real problem is the professor staring at him with burning curiosity, including Crispin Amor. His thoughts shift, returning to the werewolf rumors that Selena mentioned. As the sky darkens and the full moon becomes visible, night falls over Serin Academy. Hiding behind the house, Ludger comments that something is taking too long. He wonders if the person is roaming the area, when in reality, they are right behind him. A werewolf emerges from the shadows, directly behind Professor Ludger, making no noise. Then it suddenly lunges at him with its massive claws. Chelsy easily dodges the ferocious, swift attack by shifting his torso. Seizing the enemy's mistake, he kicks the werewolf, sending it flying. Ludger says that he was wondering what was taking so long and now understands. It was just a prank. The werewolf sarcastically asks if it would hurt for Ludger to just stand still and pretend to be surprised. Getting up, he says it has been a long time and calls Ludger Big Brother. Ludger responds that it has indeed been a while since they last met and calls him Hans. He adds that Hans never stops causing trouble wherever he goes, then asks about his appearance this time. Hans asks Ludger if he would enjoy ending up like this, all because a little dog started chasing him. Ludger mocks Hans' natural body type, which irritates him since it is actually a kind of curse. Hans has a physical condition that causes him to transform into the beast that bit him. This results in him taking the form of a half-human, half-beast as the beast factor manifests. If bitten by a cat, he becomes a cat. In this case, he turned into a dog. Hans asks if Ludger brought a counteragent, and Ludger reveals a syringe filled with green liquid. After injecting himself, Hans says that he can now walk around normally. As soon as the substance enters his body, the beast factor disappears. He would have suffered longer if not for Ludger. At their first meeting, Ludger was sent to hunt a beast, and it turned out to be a giant chihuahua. If Hans hadn't communicated with Ludger, he would have been taken down that day. Hans decides to change the subject and almost says Ludger's real name, but Ludger instantly corrects him. The man remembers that his friend wrote the name Ludger Chelsy in the letter he sent. Hans asks why he chose the identity of a professor from Serin. After asking to meet his friend in the capital, he is now in Lethavelk and asks what happened. His friend says that Ludger is incredible for managing to infiltrate, and Ludger replies that that it was his only option. Hans asks if the real Ludger was part of a secret society, and his friend says he was First Order. Now well dressed after some time has passed, Hans reflects on Ludger being a First Order executive. He perfectly remembers that new people appeared in the underworld calling themselves the Order. Ludger Chelsy believes it to be them and asks for the name of the secret organization. Hans replies that it is called the Black Dawn Society, and it makes sense to our hero. His friend says he escaped by sheer luck, and that any small mistake could be fatal for him. Ludger agrees, says he will prepare, and asks about the briefcase he requested Hans to bring. Hans hands it over, sealed, saying he wouldn't be crazy enough to open Ludger's briefcase. He says Sheridan must be waiting for him, and Hans adds that he couldn't have predicted this incident. Ludger remarks that they are both in a situation where they are dependent on medicine. He also says Hans could have found him earlier since he arrived in the city 2 days ago. He questions his friend about the delay, but Hans doesn't understand what Ludger is talking about. Then the protagonist mentions the werewolf reports from 2 days ago, and Hans says he arrived in Lithovelk today. After he says that, a deepening silence fills the air, and they notice something on the rooftops. In shock, the two friends see a real werewolf on this full moon night. They stare at the creature on the rooftop, surprised that it actually exists. Hans comments that the monster hasn't seen them, and that they should escape while they can. Ludger disagrees, saying that the creature must be searching for prey and will notice any sudden movement. Suddenly, our protagonist notices a collar around the werewolf's neck. He tells his friend that he will need to take a closer look, and Hans is surprised by Ludger's courage. The protagonist imagines that someone must have released it on purpose because of its collar. Hans questions who could be behind this, and Ludger decides to investigate, already grabbing his revolver. His friend comments that it's been a long time since he last saw him use that gun, back in the hunting days. He also remembers that Ludger used to wear a mask back then, but can't recall what it looked like. At the time, he was Abraham Van Helsing, a vampire hunter. The werewolf turns toward the movement it noticed from Ludger, walking with his hand in his pocket, unconcerned and showing no hostility. We see Chelsy, baring its fangs and drooling. The creature looks ferocious and hungry, ready to hunt its prey. Suddenly, it vanishes from the rooftop and leaps directly in front of our hero with full force. Its eyes glow, its expression is brutal, and steam escapes from its mouth. Seeing it up close, the protagonist notices a collar around its neck, raising even more questions, and he knows he will get answers as soon as he captures and interrogates the monster, which soon lets out a howl. After the howl, the creature begins striking and lunging with its claws, trying to hit its prey. Ludger dodges with a blue magic circle at his feet, allowing him to evade all the attacks. Until, after the werewolf's last lunge, it crashes against a wall, leaving it with no escape route. Then the monstrous being charges at him at high speed in a frenzy. Our protagonist, with a calm expression, smirks slightly. The blue magic circles he had placed along the ground begin to float into the air. Then, they expand and release a small wave of energy that strikes the monster. The werewolf quickly falls to the ground, stunned by the impact of the magical energy wave. Screaming with its hands over its ears, the waves seem to have left it deaf and dazed. Hans, watching the fight from hiding, wonders what just happened to the creature. Ludger says he activated ultrasonic waves that normal people can't hear. With a syringe in hand, the protagonist says there's no need to use expensive silver bullets. Holding the injection and seeing the werewolf in pain, he wants to find out who created it. But before he can administer the substance, he hears the police approaching at the worst possible moment. At that moment, the werewolf snaps out of its stunned state and makes a great leap back onto the rooftop. Ludger uses a type of grappling hook hidden under his sleeve to go after the monster. The metal hook latches onto the rooftop, and he uses the metal chain to climb up onto the buildings. From above, he sees the beastly creature running on all fours, fleeing at incredible speed. Our protagonist watches with intensity, determined not to let the werewolf escape. The police spot figures on the rooftops and begin searching for any suspicious individuals nearby. Meanwhile, Ludger continues chasing the werewolf across the rooftops at high speed. The lycanthrope is ahead, running like a quadruped, but Ludger is nearly upon him. They leap from rooftop to rooftop until the monster suddenly stops, its glowing eyes locking onto Ludger. Landing atop a train at the railway terminal, the two face each other. Our protagonist states that he only intended to knock out the beast, but it left him no choice. As the beastly creature prepares for another charge, Ludger hurls his shuriken. The metal star flies at high speed toward the monster, but it doesn't slow down and dodges in a frenzied state, drooling with its glowing eyes fixed forward. After evading the attack, it rushes toward the hunter, Ludger, who stands firm in its path. At that moment, the metal star loops back, attempting to strike the monster again. However, the beast easily dodges it without even looking at the returning projectile. Retrieving his shuriken, Ludger acknowledges that the creature has impressive reflexes. Gripping his cane, he declares that he will take down the werewolf with this final attack. From the tip of his cane, a magical blue energy forms and shoots toward the beast. He makes a gesture with his fingers while holding the cane. The werewolf lets out a loud and ferocious howl as the energy wave approaches. He remains unaffected and quickly notices Ludger's sudden movement. Rushing at full speed, Ludger launches a heavy strike toward the monster, stealthily throwing his shuriken once more. This time it lands squarely in the werewolf's torso. As the beast howls in pain, Ludger leaps over it, preparing to land another blow. However, the creature bites down on the cane, gripping it with its sharp teeth to prevent the attack. With a secret trick, Ludger pulls a hidden sword from within his cane. The werewolf is stunned, watching its enemy unsheath a blade from the cane. Swinging his arm back, our protagonist prepares to strike with his sword. Before the monster's eyes, it sees the trajectory of the sword coming straight for it. In that moment, the strike is precise, hitting the werewolf directly in the head, finishing it off without a doubt. Dashing through alleys and narrow streets, Hans barely escapes capture and wonders when Ludger will return. Suddenly, right in front of him, a piece of the werewolf falls, signaling its defeat. Hans jumps in shock, unable to contain his gasp at the sight that shakes him. Ludger appears and asks if Hans is surprised, to which he replies that he should at least give a warning before appearing out of nowhere. Hans can't believe Ludger is just going to leave him like this, but Ludger says he has gathered the information he wanted. His friend questions why he brought the werewolf's remains, and Ludger says it was just to surprise him. After inspecting the body, he confirms that the werewolf is an artificial cryptid, a product of experimentation. He then states that he and Hans must continue with their original plan, though his friend seems hesitant. Ludger insists they should establish themselves here since it's better than the capital, and they should stay in the city for a while. Hans argues that Serin is home to the lunatics who released the cryptid and the secret organization. The protagonist justifies this, saying that any incident will surely attract their attention. He asks Hans to gather information, and his friend questions whether he has to do it alone. Ludger explains that the Academy suspects him, so he can't afford to make any rash moves. He pleads with his friend to collect information and keep him informed, as he will act when the time is right. Ludger's big brother figure agrees, saying that gathering intel is his specialty. Our protagonist knows he cannot expect things to unfold smoothly. Even without being able to act yet, he must prepare by building his own strength. Analyzing the situation, he doesn't believe a mere underground organization is behind the werewolf. After all, he noticed a laboratory emblem on its collar. It's not easy to create a beast like that. However, for now, it doesn't matter. He has already dealt with the creature and doesn't want to get involved in any more trouble. News spreads about the Lethalvik killer, confirming that he has reappeared and is alive. Reports indicate that last Sunday, 5 more killings occurred in the city, bringing the total to 10. His identity remains undiscovered, but witnesses claim the culprit was a black-furred beast. The police called the culprit a lunatic and stated that they would find and arrest him soon. Ludger is in shock while reading the news since he eliminated the werewolf on Saturday, not Sunday. He wonders if there is more than one werewolf in the city of Lethalvik. A spherical orb begins to emit a blue light in Professor Ludger Chelsy's office. A large gathering of professors from the Serin Academy takes place at a conference table. When Ludger enters the room, Professor Selena tells him to sit beside her. The professors whisper about Ludger, discussing the spell he invented and his past. She asks if he saw the news about the 2 second-year students who were attacked last night. Fortunately, they weren't fatally wounded, but they were severely injured with scratches from a beast. One student said that during the attack, he opened his eyes and saw the terrifying creature that attacked them. Selena concludes that the rumors circulating throughout the week were real, and that there are now victims in Lethalvik. Then another professor announces that the headmistress has arrived and orders everyone to be silent. Selena explains that she is Mary Ross, who has been at Serin for 20 years and oversees pharmacology. The headmistress appears to announce something important to the assembled faculty. She quickly states that a mysterious assailant suddenly appeared in Serin. 2 students were severely attacked last night, and no one knows who did it. However, witnesses claim that the assailant was a werewolf with black fur. One professor disagrees, saying that the appearance of a cryptid is impossible. He asks Professor Hugo Bortag if he has anything to contest. Hugo states that Serin is protected by the Exilian Empire, and there are no beasts in this place. He finds it hard to believe that an urban legend is circulating among the Academy's students. The headmistress tells Hugo Bortag that there are already 2 victims of this werewolf. Even so, the professor strongly believes that it is not a cryptid. He asks the headmistress if the 2 victims are of noble lineage. Hugo Bortag believes the culprit is a commoner student from Serin Academy. The headmistress cannot believe what she just heard, and Hugo reinforces his theory that a commoner is responsible. After all, only aristocratic students were harmed, and he refuses to believe the story of a werewolf at Serin. He can, however, accept the possibility that someone impersonated a werewolf to carry out the attack. Ludger had thought the Black Dawn Society was at a disadvantage, but he was mistaken. He is also outraged that they are turning against each other instead of working together. He wonders if this is the true reality of Serin, the continent's finest educational academy. Suddenly, an insect falls onto Ludger Chelsy's left shoulder. He looks at the insect and tries to figure out what kind of creature just landed on him. He picks up the bug between his fingers, and when he crushes it, he notices a piece of paper. The note states that 3 experiments had escaped and asks him to either capture them alive or eliminate them. If others capture them first, there is a high risk that his identity will be exposed. Ludger hides the note and, feeling frustrated, wonders why his life is so full of difficulties. Concerned, Selena asks if Ludger is hurt, and he assures her that he is fine. He never imagined that this situation was connected to the Black Dawn Society. Given how things are unfolding, they likely did not foresee these bizarre incidents. The fact that there is a risk of his identity being exposed leaves him deeply shocked. He knows he cannot stay idle and resolves to get rid of the beasts before the organization does. After all, everything will be over if he is caught and his identity is revealed. The headmistress tells Hugo that he can think whatever he wants, but he must finish his duty. She states that patrols will be assigned and instructs that students should not be allowed out at night. This is the headmistress's order, and she adds that, if necessary, some students may be penalized. Once all the professors agree, the headmistress decides to conclude the meeting. Outside, Ludger hears a noise coming from behind him and orders the person to come out immediately. A girl behind a tree panics and becomes nervous after being discovered by Ludger. Our protagonist stares at the girl, who appears shy and embarrassed behind the tree. He notices that she is the same girl who approached him before and is disguised as a student. Certain of it, Ludger asks what she wants, and the girl begins to stutter and hesitate. Chelsy tells her to start walking and asks her to follow him, to which she agrees. Shy and awkward, the girl asks if the professor likes coffee, leaving him confused. They go to a cafe, sit down, and order 2 cups of coffee. When asked her name, the girl introduces herself as Serin Magic. He notices that she doesn't have a commoner's surname and asks for her real name. Trembling and stammering, the girl insists that this is indeed her real name. Ludger finds it strange that she isn't using a fake identity. The protagonist tells her to just spit it out already. She must have some news if she followed him. He casts a spell that blocks sound around them, surprising the girl. Ludger asks her not to call him First Order in Serin, and she blames herself for doing so. He orders her not to refer to him that way in front of others, and she acknowledges the command. Returning to the topic, he asks Sedina what situation she came to report to him. Sedina states that the werewolf incident involved an affiliated organization. It was an experiment with cryptids conducted by dark mages at Shamsis Academy. This school is composed of mages who were expelled from society due to their unethical experiments. These experiments escaped, and one of them made its way to Serin through the sewers, leaving behind some victims. As Ludger expresses his shock, Sedina apologizes for speaking too much. She continues, explaining that they will leave handling the incident to the organization, but there is something related to Ludger. After all, he lent his name under the command of Victor Dreadful, another First Order. Ludger replies that he only lent his name and didn't expect things to turn out this way. He had even forgotten about Victor. Sedina says they need to eliminate all 3 experiments, but Ludger corrects her, stating there are only 2. He then shows the identification collar of the other werewolf, shocking Rachin. He explains that 2 days ago in Lethelvik, he encountered one of the escaped experiments from the laboratory. Ludger wonders how such a talented girl, who successfully infiltrated the academy as a student, is still Third Order. He can't believe the secret organization is keeping her on the sidelines. Perhaps it's because she is an aristocrat. The anti-society organization likely doesn't favor nobles. It's probable that Sedina is being used as a tool and will be discarded once she is no longer useful. Our protagonist recently noticed a crack in Serin Academy. He never expected to see the same within the secret society of the Black Dawn. Maybe this incident will allow Ludger to gain something through Sedina Magic. Knowing that the creatures came from the sewers, Rachin plans to expand the search team in that area. Ludger states that Serin doesn't have that information yet, and the girl confirms it but admits she doesn't know for how long. The protagonist tells her that after hearing her report, he hopes to meet her again if they get the chance. He adds that she explained everything much better this time compared to their first encounter. After receiving the compliment, Ludger Chelsy dispels the magic barrier, stands up, and leaves the cafe. Serin Magic seems deeply pleased by the praise from the First Order. Someone observing from outside notices that Ludger was using magic inside the cafe. Flora wonders what kind of conversation requires the use of magic and questions who those 2 are. During class, Flora Lumos appears troubled by the scene she witnessed earlier. The spell she saw through the cafe window that time. Judging by its color, it was clearly a spell that blocks sound from passing through. Ordinary people can't perceive the scent or color of magic, but Flora is different. She wonders why they used that spell and what kind of conversation they had. The professor ends the lesson, warning students not to believe in rumors and stating that those caught spreading them will be penalized. The students discuss the rumors they heard about the werewolf and consider trying to capture it. Then, another student mentions the teacher's warning and notes that whoever gets caught will be punished. They contemplate capturing the werewolf without getting caught to claim the city's reward. Leo asks Aiden what he thinks, and Aiden replies that he would rather stay out of this matter. Leo expected this cowardly response from Aiden and asks his friend what he plans to do. His friend decides not to get involved, pointing out that there have been victims and that the professors are already handling the situation. Suddenly, a red-haired girl slams both hands on the table, demanding their attention. Excited, Aiden greets the girl, Tessie, with a good morning, but she, irritated, doesn't respond. Leah remarks that she lost and should just accept it, but the girl insists it was a tie and tells him to stay out of it. Tessie wants to fight Aiden using their abilities without holding back. Aiden refuses, saying he has afternoon classes and that the werewolf situation is a bigger concern. Tessie accuses him of making excuses to avoid fighting her. Giving up on finding an argument, Aiden admits that is indeed his real reason. reason. Tessie suggests settling their competition another way, and Aiden asks what she means. She declares that whoever catches the werewolf first wins the competition. Leo finds the offer fair and accepts it, leaving Aiden shocked by his friend's response. Tessie tells Aiden not to run away out of fear, and Leo warns him not to cry if he loses. When the girl walks away, the bespectacled boy asks why Leo did that. Leo justifies it by saying he merely agreed with her, as the professors will capture the beast anyway. However, Aiden noticed that she was being very serious, and his friend points out that she won't do it alone. Aiden has no doubt that Tessie will actually go through with it since she is reckless and a bit foolish. The two consider the possibility that she really intends to hunt the beast and stand up to check. They see Tessie outside and assume she is heading to her dormitory. They feel relieved that she isn't irresponsible enough to go after the beast until she changes direction. When they notice her determined stride, they realize she is going after the beast and are left in shock. Night falls at Serin Academy, and Ludger Chelsy walks alone through the streets. Ludger knows that many people are keeping an eye on him. Hugo asked him to stay close to the aristocratic students and be more reasonable with them. The protagonist imagines that Hugo must be desperate to the point of talking to a fallen noble, and our hero was just about to say that siding with the headmistress would be more advantageous. Ludger states that at Serin, there are no nobles, aristocrats, or commoners. This is his principle. As Chelsy takes his leave to begin his patrol, Professor Hugo tells him to wait. Our protagonist knows that if he aligns himself with Hugo, people will discover that his family is fake. Above all, he does not want to stand against the headmistress without reason. Ludger senses something strange, and when he checks a nearby bush, he finds several students spying on him. The professor asks if they are unaware that they are supposed to stay inside their dormitories. The students try to defend themselves, but Ludger is relentless and penalizes them with 5 points. He realizes that at least 20 students have already gone after the werewolf bounty, and punishing them is futile. Knowing the situation will only worsen if this continues, he prepares to hunt the beast himself, deciding to handle it before it escalates and more students get involved. Our protagonist heads to the sewage treatment station near Serin. Using the information Sedina provided about the sewers, he finds the only water pipe the monster passed through. Illuminating the area with magic from his cane, he confirms that no one else has been here. He notices the footprints of 2 werewolves on the ground. One is quite large and the other is smaller, both heading in the same direction. Following the tracks, our hero reaches a broken iron gate within the sewers. Examining the scene closely, he realizes that from this point onward, the 2 monsters split up. He observes that the larger one headed toward the school, most likely to hunt. He knows this beast is the most dangerous and wouldn't be surprised if it attacks someone right away. Suddenly, in the distance, our protagonist hears a loud, piercing scream. He immediately starts running in the direction of the scream, abandoning the tracks as they would take too long. Arriving at the scene, he sees a black-furred werewolf attacking 2 Serin students. Realizing that the girls are in danger, he decides to do something he would rather avoid. He charges forward and begins casting a spell through his cane. Orange energy radiates from the magic circle that forms and surges toward the beast. The werewolf takes too long to notice the incoming attack, and it seems too late for him. By reflex, it shields itself with its arms, but it's useless. The monster is sent flying by the impact. Ludger approaches to protect the students, who are now collapsed on the ground in front of him. The 2 girls recognize Professor Ludger, and he recognizes Lynn and Elendil Exilian. He calls their attention, and when they respond, he penalizes them with 5 points each. Both girls fail to contain their genuine expressions of shock. Elendil shouts, saying that the professor should have asked if they were okay first. Ludger questions if she is raising her voice at him because she thinks she did a good job. He adds that Elendil Exilian has too big a mouth for someone who doesn't know how to defend herself. However, she asks him to compensate Lynn's penalty instead, claiming she fell asleep while studying. Before she can finish speaking, Ludger tells her she should have considered the situation. Elendil von Exilian notices a sudden and abrupt shift in the atmosphere. Ludger orders Elendil to return to her dormitory and take care of Lynn. By doing so, they will have their penalties revoked. Seeing Elendil's dissatisfied reaction, he warns that next time, he will keep the penalty in place. Finally, the werewolf stands up, growling furiously and fiercely at our protagonist. The girls warn that the werewolf has gotten back up, but he had already noticed. Smoke rises from the creature's body after the impact of the magic, which injured it slightly. At that moment, the werewolf begins to flee, and Ludger goes after it, ordering the 2 girls to evacuate the area. At high speed, Ludger Chelsy chases after the werewolf, which runs away in fear. Climbing the walls, the beast reaches the rooftops of Serin Academy. Once again, our hero uses his grappling hook to launch himself onto the buildings in pursuit of the beast. Lynn notices how Ludger moves across the rooftops and recognizes it as a levitation spell. The 2 face each other atop the rooftops, standing near towers, with a battle about to begin. They move from rooftop to rooftop in a zigzag pattern, striking at each other simultaneously. They fight relentlessly while leaping between rooftops, gradually descending toward the ground. After neither lands a direct hit, the werewolf begins advancing fiercely toward Ludger. It attempts to slash at the professor, coming dangerously close, but he evades the attack. As soon as he dodges, he counters with an instant cast spell that lands squarely on the beast. Immediately afterward, he leaps over the creature, which is stunned by the direct hit. While in midair, he casts another spell, this time glowing blue. The 2 students are astonished to see how a true mage fights in real combat. At that moment, the werewolf becomes enraged and tries to counterattack the mage with a charge and a swipe. Before the blow lands, our protagonist prepares another spell with his staff. A burst of bluish energy shoots directly into the cryptid's chest, striking it head-on. The impact causes it to fall from the rooftop, but it uses its claws to grip the edge and prevent the fall. As the creature struggles to climb back up, Ludger begins casting another spell to knock it down for good. A magic circle forms, releasing 2 bolts of energy that hit the monster, causing it to fall from the rooftop. From above, Ludger watches as the beast slides and slowly plummets from the great height. He starts to feel exhausted and realizes that using so much mana like this isn't a good idea. The problem is that the professor can't fight without magic while the students are watching. Wanting to end the battle quickly, he is surprised to see that the beast is still moving. The creature grabs a loose piece of the rooftop and hurls it at Ludger, who barely has time to react. By reflex, he conjures a protective barrier and avoids being struck by the debris. Our protagonist is shocked that the werewolf is using tools in battle. The creature leaps and crashes into the ground at high speed, causing a massive impact. It misses its target, only destroying the ground, while Ludger escapes without a scratch. Even so, he is deeply surprised that the monster is using the environment to its advantage. For a being created based on a wolf, it shouldn't possess intelligence comparable to a human's. Ludger Chelsy begins to wonder if these monsters are truly werewolves. Meanwhile, Aiden and Leo call out for Tessie in the forest near Serin Academy. Leo thinks about giving up, believing they won't find Tessie and that she'll find her way back on her own. Aiden argues that they are also responsible since they agreed to her proposal. His friend asks if he thinks Tessie is also searching for the werewolf. Aiden isn't sure about the others, but he has a feeling Tessie would do exactly that. Leo decides they'll look for her for another 30 minutes, and if they don't find her, they'll head back. The moment he says this, both of them hear a loud scream echoing through the area. They immediately recognize it as Tessie's voice and start running toward the sound. At high speed, they race through the forest surrounding Serin Academy. Then, Aiden notices something strange in a bush, and for some reason, he suddenly collapses to the ground. Leo rushes to his friend, who appears to be suffering from a strong headache. That's when they find Tessie, who had also fallen after bumping directly into Aiden. She asks why he's there, and he explains that he heard her scream, but she insists that she never screamed. They pause to listen more carefully, and Tessie tells them to stay quiet and follow her. The 3 students move stealthily toward a bush to observe where the scream had come from. There, hidden among a pile of leaves, they spot a small werewolf pup. Tessie proudly declares that she won the bet, but Leo argues that she only found the creature. She didn't capture it. Before she can reach for it, Aiden points out that it's an injured pup hiding in an isolated place. He notes that such a small cub wouldn't be capable of everything that had happened, especially while wounded. Tessie asks if he thinks there is another werewolf in the area, but Aiden isn't sure. However, he notices that someone has been taking care of the werewolf cub. Then the boy spots something shiny among the cub's fur. It looks like a chain. As the two observe the cub's neck, the large werewolf appears behind them. Hot air escapes from the monster's mouth as it bares its fangs and drools. Leo quickly senses the creature's presence and, startled, calls Aiden's attention. At the moment the werewolf is about to attack the bespectacled boy, Leo pushes him aside and takes his place. Leo is struck by the beast's blow, sending him flying from the impact. Tessie looks closer and is shocked to realize that it is a real werewolf. Tessie grabs her wand and declares that she will take down this beast to restore her family's honor. However, she gets distracted, and the werewolf swings its claws at her. Aiden jumps in to save her. She is surprised to see the bespectacled boy embracing and pushing her away to avoid the beast's strike. Injured, Leo shouts for his friend Aiden, while Aiden asks if Tessie is okay. Tessie asks why he helped her, and Aiden replies that he couldn't just stand by and watch his friend in danger. Meanwhile, the werewolf remains fierce and wild, determined to wipe out the young students. Aiden remarks that the monster is acting like this to protect its injured cub. He asks if he's wrong, but Tessie argues that the werewolf won't understand his words. Even so, the bespectacled boy repeats that he will not harm the werewolf cub. The monster seems to become less aggressive, stopping in place rather than lunging at them. While the beast stands still, Aiden explains that it attacked them before to protect its cub. His companions disagree with him. The bespectacled boy asks them to trust him this time. He takes a few steps forward, gestures to the beast, and reassures it that everything is fine, that he won't hurt it. Speaking about the young werewolf, Aiden offers a remedy that will help ease its pain. The werewolf appears to understand and gently reaches out its hand to take the vial. However, before it can do so, a spell suddenly strikes it, injuring the werewolf without mercy. The magic then expands, binding its arms and turning into a prison that restrains the creature. Ludger appears and demands to know what the 3 students are doing there while the werewolf remains trapped. Tessie panics and screams upon seeing Professor Ludger, who tells them that they will explain themselves later. However, Aiden steps forward and asks Professor Ludger Chelsy to wait a moment. Explaining that the werewolf understands human speech, he pleads for reconsideration before eliminating it. Ludger asks what nonsense the bespectacled boy is talking about at a time like this. Aiden begins to suggest that there is a possibility this werewolf is actually human, but before he can finish his sentence, Ludger gives him a disapproving look and shoves the boy aside. Pushing him away, Ludger's dark expression terrifies the bespectacled boy. With his staff, Ludger Chelsy conjures a fire spell to attack the werewolf. As the flames grow and engulf the creature, Ludger, with his back turned to Aiden, remains unmoving. Ludger states threats that he will hold the boy accountable for his reckless actions, and Aiden stares at the flames in fear. Then he orders the students to return to their dormitories as dawn approaches. The three feel terrible for being the only ones caught by Professor Ludger. Tessie notices Aiden lost in thought, sadness evident in his eyes. Finally, the headmistress enters the room and asks if the children have been waiting for too long. Startled, the three students cannot contain their shock upon seeing the headmistress of Serin. They know that the fact she has come means this won't be an ordinary disciplinary action. When asked what they think about her presence, they remark that it won't just be a penalty deduction. Ludger confirms this, saying they should already understand that their actions yesterday were presumptuous. He adds that if things had gone slightly wrong, one of them could have been killed. The headmistress tells them they don't need to feel like the world has ended and suggests that Ludger ease up on them. One of the students protests, telling the headmistress that this isn't something they can simply forget. Even though she points out that the situation ended well, Aiden thoroughly explains everything that happened. She then asks Aiden if he jumped in to save Tessie, causing him to feel embarrassed. For their reckless actions, the headmistress gives the trio 10 penalty points. However, she also grants them 20 merit points for taking action in a moment of desperation. The trio is shocked by the news and overjoyed, while the headmistress asks Ludger if he has any complaints. Ludger agrees, and the headmistress asks the students to continue putting in the same effort. The students thank the headmistress for her words, and Aiden observes Ludger. He looks into his eyes warily, saying nothing but wondering if he is satisfied now. The headmistress hadn't expected Ludger to want her to speak to them. However, he argues that it wouldn't look good for his image if people found out he asked for it. She understands and asks if there was anything strange about the werewolf, but he says nothing that he can remember. She states that there's nothing more they can do, and thanks Ludger, as there were no fatalities thanks to him. She also adds that she looks forward to Professor Ludger's excellent performance in the future. Alone in his office, our protagonist reflects and recalls seeing the werewolf cub. He remembers that it was certainly a human body that had not fully transformed into a beast. The lunatics who created these cryptids didn't use wolves as their base. They captured humans and turned them into beastly werewolves. However, he doesn't regret eliminating them, as he would have been in danger if he hadn't. Besides, the creatures harmed people, and that fact doesn't change. That's why they ended up like that, but the image of the cub trying to save its father haunts Ludger. Our protagonist pulls a magical communication orb from his coat and calls his friend Hans. He says he has a request for him, while meanwhile, the classmates discuss their merit points. Tessie asks if Leo's arm is getting better, and he says it will heal in a few days. Noticing Aiden's strange expression, the girl asks if something is bothering him, but he denies it. He mentions the strange collar that was around the cub's neck the previous day. Tessie is very surprised by this news and shouts, prompting Leo to ask her to lower her voice. That's why Aiden tried to stop the professor. There was a possibility they were artificially created. Leo recalls bizarre rumors about strange people hiding in Serin. He isn't sure if it's true, but it is strange for a werewolf to be wearing a collar. The students discuss Ludger and the odd expression he made at Aiden the previous night. Aiden insists that at that moment, Professor Ludger Chelsy definitely saw something. Tessie asks if he is hiding something, and the Four Eyes says Ludger must know something, but he prefers to believe this is just imagination. A professor at Serin wouldn't hide something like that. Even so, he doesn't rule out the possibility that Ludger is part of the secret organization from the rumors. Tessie tells Four Eyes that he is overthinking and stuck in his thoughts. She reminds them of what the headmistress said, that Ludger gave her all the details. If he were acting the way Aiden suggests, there would be no reason for the headmistress to say that. Even though she pretends otherwise, Tessie believes Ludger looked after them and helped them. And yet, both Leo and Aiden are still suspicious of Professor Ludger Chelsy. Four Eyes agrees with Tessie, who says they shouldn't worry about it now. Aiden comments that he's really hungry and invites his friends to eat with him. The moment he invites Tessie to join them for lunch, he is shocked. She says that eating together is what friends do, and when Aiden says they're friends, she turns red. Excited, she declares that she'll eat with them, and Aiden also gets excited. Hans asks if Ludger checked the materials he sent, and his friend confirms that he did. The missing people from Lethelvik and the places where certain individuals gather. Several important figures have been spotted near the abandoned factory, and Hans suspects that is the location. Checking the information his friend requested, he found that workers had disappeared outside the city. Ludger asks if there was a family of 3 among them, and Hans confirms that the entire family vanished. Understanding the situation, our protagonist says he will investigate the area. Night falls, and outside the city, specifically in the industrial district, 2 men complain about being bored and wonder how much longer they'll have to stay there. They question how people managed to escape and who was in charge at the time. One comments that the kidnapped boy wasn't properly sedated. They tried to grab him to increase the dosage, but he thrashed around and caused a commotion. The problem was that no one anticipated his parents would become an issue after witnessing the scene. One asks if the parents even cared since they had already been turned into werewolves. The other confirms that they did. After all, that was why the 2 of them fled and attacked people. They conclude that the entire problem and all their suffering are the boy's fault. Suddenly, the 2 men in the middle of their conversation hear footsteps coming from a tunnel. They exchange glances and prepare the weapons holstered at their sides. Before they can react, both are struck down and eliminated instantly. Their bodies collapse, lifeless as heavy footsteps echo through the sewer tunnel. Ludger emerges. Ludger, dressed in dark clothing, hides his face beneath a hood and mask. Before this happened, Hans had spoken with Ludger and commented on his specific attire. He asks his friend if he is going alone, and Ludger responds by asking if Hans would come if he asked. Hans says he could probably take down 2 enemies, but Ludger insists that it's better if he goes alone. However, Hans warns that there are 40 people inside, and they are preparing to leave the area. Questioning their combat abilities, Hans estimates that each person is armed, and 2 of them are mages. He then points to a grate in the sewer and tells Ludger that he can enter through there. Before leaving, Ludger asks Hans about the family they had discussed earlier. He inquires about the age of the couple's young son. When Ludger hears Hans say that the boy is 7 years old, he feels deeply guilty about what he has done. Returning to his mission at the Black Dawn Society's base, he advances further into the area. Along the way, he encounters more people, and the sounds that follow make it clear that he has eliminated them. Through a long, dark corridor, Ludger leaves behind a trail of bodies he has coldly taken down. Suddenly, a bee flies out from one of the bodies, seeming to observe the scene in an unsettling way. Several workers from the organization carry crates back and forth. 2 men notice that someone has infiltrated the base and assume it's someone from the security department. Observing through the bee, one of them states that the infiltrator doesn't seem to be from security. They decide this is actually a good thing after all. No one will care if they eliminate this person. Meanwhile, other men yell to open fire on the infiltrator, and they begin shooting their weapons. However, a magical barrier protects our protagonist, leaving the henchman in shock. Realizing he is a mage, they quickly order the firearms to be put away and for swords to be drawn. Ludger pulls out his own weapon, and the men scoff, saying that inside the silence zone, his gun will be useless. Before they can even think about reacting, Ludger has already eliminated one of the henchmen. It is then revealed that the shot he fired was imbued with magic, allowing it to function despite the zone's effect. The remaining subordinates notice that his bullets are infused with mana. Fearing for their lives, they attempt to flee, until a man in armor carrying a massive weapon steps forward to intervene. The armored man declares that if Ludger takes a hit from his high-tech weapon, which resembles a bazooka, he'll be finished. Laughing, the armored man fires a laser blast from his weapon at our protagonist. However, he is left in complete shock when he sees the mage blocking the attack with a spell. He notices that the spell possesses metallic properties combined with alchemy. Realizing that his high-voltage current will work due to the metallic nature of the spell, he prepares to strike again. Suddenly, a mana-infused shot from Ludger's gun is fired, hitting the energy tube on the man's back. In shock, the armored man watches as the energy surges through the tube and spreads, causing immense pain to the surrounding henchmen. With a single spell, our hero has already taken down nearly 10 people at once. Looking upward, he senses something strange and quickly shoots at the ceiling, taking down the bee. He realizes he was being watched by an insect, confirming his suspicion that he was under surveillance. Ludger wonders if this is the work of the infamous siblings from the underworld who specialize in insect-based espionage. He debates whether he should eliminate all the insects first. Suddenly, he stomps the ground, releasing waves of magic that spread out and reach the airborne bees. Upon being hit by these invisible waves, the bees are instantly eliminated, falling lifelessly to the ground. The insect handler, who had been observing through them, realizes he has lost his connection to his spy. Before the insects were destroyed, he detected sound waves, vibrations that had wiped them out. He now understands that Ludger's magic consists of metallic and wind properties, making him a serious problem. Since small flying insects are weak against wind, he decides to release a much larger one. He instructs Serin, a bald man, to get ready, and Serin agrees, preparing himself. Everyone braces themselves because, based on the infiltrator's trajectory, he will enter through the door at any moment. Ready for the spy's arrival, they are startled when the lights suddenly go out. The 2 men suspect that the invader is toying with them, which is why he cut the electricity. The blonde man grows uneasy when Serin doesn't respond and calls out for his companion, until he notices that where his head should be, there is nothing, just his body standing still. The bald man's head is on the ground, and his friend panics and screams upon realizing it. He is in shock when he notices that the intruder has already entered the room without them noticing. After all, it happened just moments after the power was cut, and he decides to strike the man before being taken down himself. At that moment, a large insect resembling a centipede emerges from his sleeve and jumps from his arm. The criminal then notices the hooded and masked intruder standing right behind him stealthily. In an instant, our hero readies a strike with his cane, aiming directly at the criminal. The man wonders why a mage is engaging in hand-to-hand combat and begins to fear him. When he tries to increase the distance to escape close combat, Ludger casts a spell. The blonde man recognizes that Ludger is conjuring floating flame and is completely shocked. He becomes even more terrified when he realizes the man invoked the spell in mere moments. Before he can react, the spell is completed, and the flames rush toward him as he screams in despair. The flames engulf his body, and the impact of the spell sends him flying. The henchmen are left stunned, seeing that the intruder invaded their base and attacked their boss. Still alive, the boss groans in pain and demands to know who the invader is as Ludger draws a weapon and points it at him. A loud bang and a gunshot echo through the room, leaving the henchmen in shock. Everyone wonders how he managed to eliminate the insect brothers so easily and quickly. When Ludger turns to face them, his cold and sadistic gaze fills them all with fear. But suddenly, something unexpected moves toward Ludger, who notices it just in time to dodge. A massive insect leg sweeps past him, and he realizes it is coming from Varen's fallen body. Even after being taken down, the body still emits a voice and moves with a transmuted giant insect arm. A mouth appears on the palm of Varen's hand, saying it is in pain. It expresses surprise at being caught in an ambush and at how quickly the two of them were eliminated. Ludger asks if this is an insect-type being since it is still talking despite missing the upper half of its body. The creature says that its body has surpassed human limits, and something begins to emerge from its abdomen. A loud noise erupts as a massive shadow takes form before Ludger, making him wary. A massive green leg plants itself on the ground, and the creature says it does not grieve for the death of its younger brother. A giant insect-like creature emerges in front of Ludger, threatening him with deadly intent. All the subordinates in the area scream in terror, scrambling to flee the scene as quickly as possible. The massive insect begins attacking wildly, sending some henchmen flying with its strikes. It attacks relentlessly as Ludger dodges and questions if the monster has no concern for its own subordinates. Without delay, our hero draws his magic-powered firearm and starts shooting at the beast. However, the bullets that hit barely seem to affect the insect's tough exoskeleton. To counter Ludger, the monstrous insect swings its enormous leg in a devastating strike. Dodging backward, our hero quickly begins casting another spell. As he conjures flickering flames, the massive centipede-like monster swiftly evades to the side. Ludger is stunned that it managed to dodge despite its enormous body. Immediately, the giant creature attempts to grab the protagonist with its claws and successfully seizes him. While trapped in the creature's grip, Ludger begins casting another spell to break free. This time, he lands flickering flames directly on the giant centipede. Even so, when the smoke clears, its face, with sharp fangs and a hardened shell, remains completely intact. Ludger can't believe the monster is still fine after a point-blank attack. Then, the creature hurls our protagonist far away. It tells him that if he wants to burn it, he will need at least a level 4 spell. Letting out a thunderous roar, the beast swings its legs, striking the spot where Ludger had been. However, when its claw smashes into the wall, it notices that its target has vanished, leaving a hole in the wall. The monstrous winged insect begins searching the area, incredulous at Ludger's disappearance. Then it realizes that Ludger is hidden above, clinging to the ceiling, and it strikes a pillar to knock him down. The column connected to the ceiling cracks and collapses in front of the monster, but Ludger swiftly dodges behind it. The monster remarks that the young mage is quite fast, just like its winged insects. Our protagonist realizes that neither weapons nor third-tier spells will work against this opponent, and he knows that the creature won't give him the chance to use a fourth-tier spell, which takes time to cast. With a darker expression, Ludger states that he didn't want to have to resort to this. The beast senses something strange, and Ludger declares that there is no other choice as he begins to cast a spell. Meanwhile, outside, Hans shivers from the cold and regrets not bringing a coat. Hans thinks the fight should have ended by now and assumes it must be difficult to face two dark mages. Looking toward the factory, his friend notices an intense, blinding light radiating from within. A massive burst of light and an explosion of energy erupt from the building, spreading outward. Seeing the entire area engulfed in flames, Hans realizes that Ludger has used his final resort, true magic. Hans considers any powerful spell to be true magic and wonders what kind of spell this one was. Ludger returns and his friend asks what happened. He simply replies that he took care of everything, including the test subjects. His friend asks if there was a way to bring them back, but Ludger says there wasn't. That's why he eliminated them. They confirm that it was a drug that transforms people, and Hans suspects that someone is sponsoring this operation. Our hero tells his friend to relax because he has already figured out who is behind this grand experiment. Hans cannot believe that Ludger has already uncovered the mastermind behind it all. Knowing he won't be able to stop his friend, Hans gives up and heads to the hideout first. Ludger remains standing alone as the factory behind him is about to turn to ashes. Meanwhile, in another location during an extravagant dinner, a nobleman throws a plate at a servant. The noble curses at his maid, humiliating her, and tells her that she isn't worthy of eating his food. An elderly nobleman, filled with contempt, berates all of his maids for their financial status. Frustrated, the noble stands up from the table, complaining about his incompetent staff. He reflects on the money spent on the test subjects for the experiment, who failed to be properly managed. He doesn't know who is at fault, but he hopes someone has taken care of the test subjects. Despite everything, the results of the experiment are approaching, and soon, they will be in his hands. His goal is for the drug to restore his body to its peak physical condition. Not only will he be rejuvenated, but he will also become stronger and more perfect than ever before. With this substance, the youth he sacrificed to build his fortune will be restored. On the old man's balcony, Ludger, masked and hooded, calls out to Belfort Rixon. Startled, the noble demands to know who he is, only to be swiftly thrown to the ground and restrained with ease. The old man begins to scream loudly, calling for his guards. Ludger informs him that they won't come. He has already placed a sound barrier over the entire room. Our protagonist states that he has a question for Belfort Rixon. He brings up the 7-year-old child who should have been alive, not turned into a monster along with his parents. A child who smiled at the person about to eliminate them, as if grateful. He asks Belfort how he thinks that person felt in that moment. Still pinned down, the old man chuckles, realizing realizing that Ludger was the one who eliminated the test subjects. Belfort Rickson claims there must be a misunderstanding between them, suggesting they can resolve this through conversation. He tells Ludger that he shouldn't have been concerned about eliminating the test subjects. They were just trash, and no one cared about them. The old man insists that he gave miserable people a second chance to contribute to humanity's evolution. When Belfort asks if that isn't a noble sacrifice, Ludger tells him to forget it. He says that answer was more than enough for him, and then injects the serum into the old man. In shock, Belfort Rickson screams, his eyes widening in terror at what is about to happen. Since Belfort's response was already enough, Ludger didn't even bother to get angry. But now, utterly enraged, the old man demands to know what the masked intruder has done to him. Ludger explains that he read the records, which state that even a small dose of the serum turns humans into werewolves. This made him wonder what would happen if someone were injected with an entire vial. Belfort Rickson begins to transform, screaming in agony as madness overtakes him. He mutates into a monstrous, grotesque werewolf with multiple arms, gigantic and deranged. Our protagonist remarks that Belfort wouldn't understand his feelings even if he tried to explain them. That's why he made the arrogant old man experience the same pain he and the test subjects felt. As he dispels the sound barrier, Belfort's subordinates finally hear his agonized screams. Panicked by the terrifying cries, the men rush frantically toward Mr. Belfort Rickson's quarters. They are caught off guard by a massive aberrant creature, unsure of where it came from. They cast magic to eliminate the monster and order someone to call Mr. Belfort. His subordinates unleash fire magic, attacking the abomination he has become. Noticing that it remains alive, they decide to attack with greater force while conserving mana. In a hideout, Ludger orders Hans to gather materials for his work and store the rest. Hans tells his friend to take a look at the hideout since it took a lot of effort to secure it. Ludger says he will do so the next time he returns. Ludger states that when he comes back, he will be operating from a more fitting position in the underworld. On the cold night streets of Lethavelk, our hero continues his mission. Glancing to the side, he sees a boat anchored in the middle of the sea and clenches his fists in anger. He stares at the boat, still motionless in the middle of the water, seemingly plotting something. Reporters arrive at Belfort Rickson's mansion, discussing his sudden passing. They mention that when the guards arrived, there was no sign of Rickson, only a monster. The rumors that Belfort was involved with forbidden magic now seem to be confirmed. As they talk, the journalists note that the monster was finally subdued by the guards after an hour. They are shocked when they see the Department of Security arriving at the scene, along with the Order of the Night Knights. Leading the operation is Tarina Lionhowl, the commander and protector lord. Seeing the Department of Security present, they wonder if the situation is truly that serious. Since they failed to get inside the mansion for coverage, they decide to speak with the Knight Commander. A security guard at the site gulps nervously upon seeing Tarina, who orders him to open the gate. Stammering, the man says he was instructed not to let anyone in. With a cold gaze and an intimidating presence, Tarina Lionhowl commands him to open the gate again. Intimidated, the two guards comply, allowing the imposing protector lord Tarina to pass through. The members of the Department of Security enter as Inspector Teberan introduces himself. Tarina tells him he did a good job, but now the department will take over. She also requests all evidence and information he has gathered before dismissing him. In shock, Teberan questions whether he should hand over everything to the knights, but he ultimately accepts the order. Teberan instructs his team to withdraw immediately as the department takes over. Anya struggles to maintain composure, and her partner tells her that such behavior is disgraceful. She tells her senior, Lloyd, that they don't need to keep up appearances when no one is watching. Lloyd insists that they must uphold the reputation of the Night Knights and maintain their discipline. Tarina reassures them that it's fine to relax their posture as long as they're away from the press. However, she demands that they do not forget the reason they came to this mansion. They come across a massive grotesque corpse on the ground, and Tarina wonders if this is the monster. She declares that Belfort was not only involved in dark magic, but also encrypted research. The fact that he was taken down by a monster out of nowhere cannot be mere coincidence. Lloyd reinforces that witness reports align with the idea that the monster appeared and Rickson was eliminated. Just by looking at the abomination's body, they can tell it was burned down to its organs. After examining the corpse, the Night Knights decide to investigate the interior of the mansion. The Protector Lord gazes at a portrait of a woman and notices that the wallpaper remains unburned. Finding this odd, she pushes the painting aside and discovers a secret compartment. Lloyd notices the hidden space, but Tarina states that there is nothing inside it. Judging by its size and location, it would have been the perfect place to hide a safe. Lloyd remarks that since Rickson was a corrupt businessman, he likely hid illicit money there. A man like that would have kept his secret fortune in such a place. It was likely there until last night. The fact that the back of the space is free of dust suggests that the hidden safe was recently removed. The emergence of the monster, the death of a millionaire, and the disappearance of his safe are no coincidence. Tarina suspects that a third party was involved, yet they left no trace, which is highly unusual. The only person the Protector Lord knows who possesses such skill is Arsene Lupin. Lloyd appears unfamiliar with the name, but Tarina Lionhowl does not offer an explanation. She then asks if there have been any strange incidents in Leaf of Elk recently. There was a case where a factory burned down in the city's abandoned industrial zone. That incident occurred just before the death of Belfort Rickson the previous night. Tarina states that there must be something important related to this case at that location, and they decide to head there. Meanwhile, in his office, Ludger experiences a sudden episode of his chronic, acute headache. The side effects of true magic take a toll on his mana reserves, affecting our protagonist. Has a condition that makes him lose mana just by breathing. Without his pills, he would have a serious problem. After taking the pills, he feels his weakness and headache improving. Now, he no longer has to worry about the werewolves. After all, he eliminated them and burned the bodies to leave no traces. But there's still the situation with Aiden, who tried to stop Ludger until the very end. It seemed unusual for him to decide to take down those werewolves as well, especially with Aiden being nearby at the time. He might have seen something. Even though Ludger burned the beast, if he saw something, even for just a second, it could be a problem, and Ludger hadn't expected so many complications. There's no guarantee that Aiden won't talk to his acquaintances, and the easiest solution is, with a dark expression and sinister thoughts, Ludger considers eliminating Aiden. Reluctantly, he remembers the four-eyed student speaking to the werewolf peacefully, and he concludes that he cannot eliminate his student after all. It would be too risky. Aiden possesses an unusual magic that even the headmistress has her eye on. If anything happens to the boy, Ludger won't be excluded from the Academy's suspicions. Lying on the bed, our hero tries to focus on recovering from his exhaustion first. He recalls that Aiden learned his unusual magic from a traveling mage when he was younger. He doesn't know whether to consider this fate or mere coincidence. Back at the abandoned and ruined factory, the Protector Lord analyzes the wreckage. She states that it's difficult to confirm anything after all. The criminal burned everything, including the evidence. She wonders about the reason for setting fire to the factory while also eliminating Belfort. Lloyd suggests that the factory might have only appeared abandoned while secretly operating. The rookie speculates that black magic and cryptid research were being conducted there, which is why everything was set on fire. They came to investigate the strange coincidence, but there's no official plan to examine this place. She wonders who the criminals were trying to avoid by disappearing in such a strange way. She considers dismissing it all as mere coincidences, but there are too many suspicious clues for that. Lloyd is asked if there are any similar cases, and he mentions the werewolf in the city a few days ago. He notes that the werewolf appeared at Serin Academy and entered through the sewers. Tarina says it's possible due to the low security and asks if the students are safe. Lloyd responds that the werewolf was eliminated by a professor after injuring 3 students. Tarina asks if any remains were confirmed, and Lloyd says it was burned to ashes. The Protector Lord is shocked upon hearing that the werewolf was burned. Noticing the commander's discomfort, Lloyd asks if she wants to go to Serin. She refuses, deciding to focus on investigating the clues around them instead. Tarina finds it excessive to link the two situations just because both the werewolf and the factory were burned. However, she decides to keep the possibility in mind. After all, it is quite the coincidence. Eliminating traitors of the Empire is the duty of the Order of the Night Knight. Back at Serin, students gossip about Ludger defeating the cryptid. They comment that he has a military background and experience as a cryptid hunter. A new white-haired girl notices there's no place to sit. She knows the other students have been avoiding her since that past incident. The senior student Elendil greets the freshman Lynn, who responds politely and kindly. Irritated, the students grow annoyed that a commoner is sitting near the noble Elendil. Thinking back to the previous days when they were caught by Professor Ludger, Lynn wondered if Ludger would be okay, and Elendil said he was a respectable professor. She asks the freshman why she was walking outside the academy at night. Elendil is shocked that no one woke Lynn up, and Lynn explains that she was bringing something to the librarian. She apologizes for oversleeping and asks why the noble was out at night. The noble responds that she was guiding students back to their room. After being called Your Majesty by Lynn, she asks to be referred to simply as Senior. Lynn didn't expect the noble to patrol personally or to approach a commoner. Even so, she feels special sitting next to Your Majesty. Interrupting the freshman's inner monologue, Professor Ludger opens the classroom door. Ludger begins his lecture on the specialization of elemental magic properties. Among the 4 major specializations of magic, elemental property mastery is the most important. For that reason, it must be the simplest one so that even first-year students can grasp it. If some students haven't learned it yet, Ludger decides to introduce a new method. Flora grows suspicious of the method the professor is about to present in today's lesson. It's a method that allows elemental magic strength to increase from 20% to 80%. The students wonder if there is a method that does this, but they believe in the new professor. Ludger asks a random student which elements he can use, and the student replies with water and ice. He then asks the boy to materialize the element he has the most confidence in conjuring. In the boy's hands, a sphere of ice slowly begins to form. His professor tells him he is average, and Anthony thanks him, but the professor adds that it is nothing remarkable. When the boy becomes sad about this, his professor instructs everyone to carefully observe his technique. In an instant, a sphere of highly abundant energy forms in Ludger Chelsy's hand, and in his other hand, a perfect snowflake takes shape. The students notice that the magic was performed with the same amount of mana, yet it was much more efficient. Seeing his student's interest, he decides to use this lesson to teach the theory. Flora Lumos seems both very interested and very irritated with Ludger. He explains that elemental magic is the foundation of pure magic and a part of its manifestation. He summons the 4 primary and great elements of magic: water, fire, earth, and air. They are simple compared to the other 10 elements that exist today. He offers 5 merit points to anyone in the class who can explain why elemental magic evolved. Using fire as an example, the student suggests that it was used to ward off darkness or burn forests. After the entire class gets the answer wrong, Flora responds that it was used to burn and eliminate people. As soon as Ludger confirms her answer is correct, the whole class is shocked. Burning with fire, drowning with water, cutting with wind, and electrocuting with electricity. The reasons magic developed were war and slaughter. In the freezing cold, however, fire symbolized survival rather than destruction. Water-powered mills, wind-turned windmills, and electricity illuminated the dark. Based on human actions, the elemental purpose constantly changes. Fighting for a better world is the ideal that students must embrace before learning elements. Deciding to begin the practical lesson at that moment, he instructs everyone to create an elemental sphere. He asks Joseph to focus on his magic flow, as his energy release is too weak for a second-year student. Ludger critiques Irina's plant attribute, noting that it looks dead and rotten. He advises the girl to imagine a fresh sprout emerging from the ground, as this will help with the spell. Leo thinks that Ludger has no mercy, until he notices Aiden looking nervous. While Leo already holds the sphere of energy in his hand, Aiden merely stares at the table. Our protagonist observes the bespectacled boy and wonders why he is acting this way. Ludger declares that he will teach Aiden how to conjure fire magic and will not abandon a student. Patiently and step by step, he asks if the young man knows how to perform basic manifestation. Aiden recalls his past, where his 2 sisters complained while his father smiled upon coming home. Even with little food and the cold wind piercing his clothes, the fire in the hearth comforted him. That warmth remains vivid in his memory as if it had happened just yesterday. In the blink of an eye, elemental fire magic manifests in Aiden's hands. By channeling the memory and emotions he imagined, he successfully conjures the element of fire. Professor Ludger praises the bespectacled boy, telling him he has done very well. Ludger states that this is a warm, not destructive, flame and acknowledges that Aiden visualized something. Aiden's fire is exactly what he thought. It is the product of his own mind and his own magic. Aiden is surprised by the comment that this manifestation is his personal magic. His professor instructs him not to forget this feeling in future attempts. Everyone now understands Ludger's method, in which he asks students to draw from their own experiences. Basic knowledge should form the foundation of elemental properties. After all, any child can recognize that fire is hot and ice is cold. A true mage must manifest an element by recalling an intense moment from their life. They must experience the element with all 5 senses at once. One of the students attempts this technique, and their elemental magic visibly becomes stronger. Everyone is excited about Ludger's teaching, except for Flora, who appears bored. Reflecting, she says she already knew this and had expected him to teach something groundbreaking. She wonders why Ludger is focusing on Aiden and praising him for merely manifesting an element. She questions what happened to the professor who humiliated her in the first lesson before everyone. Changing her mind about staying unnoticed, she decides to do something different. Flora Lumos manifests a crystal that emanates a great amount of energy, eager to see if Ludger will praise her. Her friend notices an overlap of magic and asks if she really knows how to use it. She decides to apply wind magic around it to create a whirlwind. Suddenly, something seems to go out of Flora's control, and she is startled by the potential of the magic. Her friend asks if this is dangerous and tells Flora Lumos to stop the spell immediately. Seeing that her magic is about to explode, she decides to stop and create a barrier to prevent harming anyone. All the students start running and distancing themselves from Flora Lumos' uncontrolled magic. Suddenly, Ludger appears, shouts Flora's name, and orders her to focus to stop the magic. He commands Flora Lumos to concentrate and not lose control of her magical power. With a serene and calm tone, Ludger Chelsy says he will help the student. Placing his palm over Flora's hand, they begin to control the magic together. Surprised, the second-year student notices that the magic is stabilizing. Determined and resolute, she decides to continue after coming this far and finishes the spell. Flora remarks that there have always been 2 kinds of looks directed at her. The first was envy, and the second was jealousy, but she never cared about them and always ignored them. For her, the hardest to endure was the one that looked down on her and treated her as an illegitimate daughter. It was her father's cold gaze, and Flora recalls Ludger giving her a 10-point penalty. Along with the sense of defeat and humiliation from that day, she awakened memories of her childhood. She couldn't even look at her professor's face at the end, having turned her back. To Flora, Ludger's gaze was the same as her father's in the past, belittling her. The Lumos family never forgets their grudges, and she intends to defeat her father using her abilities. It was a promise Flora made to herself. Back to the present, the girl notices the irregular colors returning to normal and pushes herself a little further. After putting in more effort with her professor's help, she completes the elemental manifestation. She feels satisfied for managing to manifest something as complex as this crystal. However, Ludger looks straight at her and says that Flora acted recklessly and naively. He adds that he doesn't mind if she tries new magic and fails. After all, everyone fails. However, the situation changes when she puts students in danger and Flora apologizes. Ludger points out that beyond her inexperience in overlapping two elements, she initially mixed fire and ice, and it is difficult to harmonize two opposing elements. Flora admits that she forcibly attempted to overlap three elements, but emphasizes that she succeeded. When she claims that her fire and ice overlay was perfect, Ludger is left speechless, and he responds by instantly invoking both elements in his hand and fusing them. With a manifestation Flora cannot yet achieve, he tells her she will soon understand the difference. He states that her element overlay was only visually appealing due to the frozen fire. Ludger asserts that beauty was its only quality and asks if she did it just to show off. Flora Lumos is left speechless, facing yet another humiliation in front of the entire class. Meanwhile, Professor Ludger casts an elemental spell that emits a bright flash, and suddenly snowflakes begin falling from the classroom ceiling, astonishing the students. Flora realizes that he invoked an advanced spell to extinguish the fire, and in doing so, he maintained both the expansion of fire and the coldness of ice in a single magic. He incorporated the same elements into something far more practical. Flora Lumos clearly recognizes her defeat, and Ludger calls her attention to something. Giving her advice, he tells the girl not to belittle herself for the weakness in her technique. A little out of it, the girl doesn't seem to have heard him and asks what Ludger just said. Ludger tells her that her ability is very interesting. He has never seen anyone her age with such a technique. However, he questions something deeper. Is her magic only meant for display? After all, as her professor, he has no right to interfere with her magic's purpose. But he advises the girl to find another reason to use her magic besides mere exhibition. Placing a hand on Flora's shoulder, he tells her this will be for the sake of her dignity. The girl's eyes widen at the mention of her own dignity. After that, Professor Ludger tells everyone to return to their seats and descends the stairs. That's when Flora realizes he wasn't belittling or humiliating her, but rather he was concerned. Flora Lumos knows that her father would never look at her the way Ludger just did. Presenting symptoms of a headache, Flora places her hand on her forehead, and her friend comes to help. She says she's fine, just dizzy from using mana, and feels like she's about to faint. The girl wonders if the professor is okay since he must have used far more mana than she did. Feeling dizzy and exhausted, Ludger is grateful that he took some pills earlier. Ludger is surprised that Flora managed to overlay three complex elements. Chelsy had also been harshly reprimanded by his professor when he showed off like that. He wonders if he pushed Lumos too hard because of that memory, and if she is upset. Even if that's the case, Professor Ludger Chelsy hopes the girl will overcome it. After all, his advice is never just empty words. Back in class, our protagonist is pleased with the results and expected this from the academy. He recalls the headmistress mentioning that there were many talented students this year. This made our hero wonder if this would be the golden era of magic. Until student Len catches his attention as she tries to manifest her elemental magic. Ludger notices that she can't manifest the element because the element doesn't exist. With that, he ends the lesson and replaces the homework with a review of what they learned today. He then tells Lynn to follow him to the teacher's office, and she obeys, heading to the room. With the girl already seated on the office sofa, Ludger tells her to wait a moment. Lynn panics, imagining the worst, expecting either expulsion or a personal interview. She convinces herself that being unable to conjure an element will get her expelled from class. As the girl reflects on how she doesn't want to give up on Professor Ludger's lessons, she observes him shuffling through papers and assumes she's about to be transferred to another class. Before Ludger can say anything, Lynn pledges to improve and begs not to be expelled from his class. Ludger wonders what the girl is talking about and shows her a book. She asks if it's a transfer request form, but he insists she take the book. Then Professor Ludger instructs the girl to read and learn from this book from now on. The path she had never known will now unfold before her. Lynn asks the professor where he got the book, realizing it explains magic without an elemental attribute. He says he came across it by chance and that it contains the life observations of a woman. His student can't believe that another mage with non-elemental magic existed besides her. When Lynn asks what happened to that woman, Ludger tells her that she is no longer in this world. The girl seems surprised by Ludger's response, and he falls into deep thought after saying it. He comments that it has not yet been determined whether non-elemental magic truly lacks an element. He also mentions the 10th element, metal, being similar to the earth element. He tells Lynn not to be anxious because the world of magic is constantly changing. The homework Ludger assigns her is to focus on reading the book for now. Reflecting, our protagonist knows that non-elemental magic is astonishing. He notices that Lynn possesses judgmental eyes capable of distinguishing good from evil. Since she is not yet fully developed, she cannot control this ability very well for now. He also never expected the book written by that woman to end up back in Lynn's hands like this. This makes our hero wonder if this situation is a matter of fate. Dawn breaks in Serin, and Lynn continues training her non-elemental magic. The method that Professor Ludger taught Aiden has been incredibly helpful. That day, his gaze while handling magic was both calm and serious. As expected, she and her friends misjudged him and doubted Ludger for no reason. She can no longer see how someone who loves magic as much as he does could be bad. Suddenly, Aiden begins watching as a popular student forms a circle of people around him. He wonders who they are and why the nobles are gathering like that. Then, one of them, whom he thought was a good person, Jevin, asks if he is the boy who can't use elemental magic, and he decides to insult Leo, calling him arrogant, which immediately irritates the blonde, who curses back at him. Aiden apologizes to Jevin, even without knowing the reason for the noble's irritation. As soon as the four-eyed boy asks Jevin to let them pass peacefully, he agrees, but under one condition. He demands that Aiden bow before him, and the redhead, irritated, asks if he has no shame in requesting that. Jevin asks why a fallen aristocrat is giving her opinion on a matter she wasn't invited to. The girl gets angry, but Aiden intervenes, saying that Jevin can say whatever he wants about him. However, he will never forgive him for mocking his friends, and he glares at him with hatred. Jevin Filio says he doesn't care if the four-eyed boy forgives him or not, then asks if he really wants to go through with this. Aiden declares that he will officially register a magic duel between him and Jevin Filio. His two friends are shocked and shout in concern, asking what Aiden has done. He proposes that if he wins, Jevin must apologize to Tessie and Leo. With a malicious smile, the foolish aristocrat agrees, if the four-eyed boy wins the duel. As Jevin threatens Aiden, Professor Ludger appears and demands to know what is going on. Both are startled to see the professor, who grows concerned upon finding Aiden in yet another predicament. When asked for an explanation, Jevin states that it is a fair duel, officially registered and mutually agreed upon. Ludger can hardly believe that first-year students are already thinking about engaging in magic duels. Our protagonist wonders what is wrong with the aristocrat Jevin Filio. He questions whether Jevin simply wants to stand out in front of another noble boy who is staring at the professor. Ludger declares that he does not want to take responsibility for an incident that hasn't even happened and denies the duel. The students attempt to argue against Ludger until an aristocratic professor speaks up, urging him to allow the fight. The noble professor questions whether denying it would be an abuse of Ludger's authority as a teacher. He argues that an educator should not use their authority to prevent a voluntary duel. Even without knowing the aristocrat's true intentions, Ludger Chelsy recognizes the validity of his argument. Considering the possibility of students getting hurt, the aristocratic professor invites Ludger to participate in the match as well. Our hero asks for his students' opinions, and they agree with the professor's proposal. Since both sides have agreed, Ludger decides to follow through with Chris's suggestion. Facing Ludger directly, Chris proposes they make a bet. He says it isn't mandatory, but he finds it amusing to make a bet when he is certain he will win the duel. With cold eyes and a calm tone, Ludger Chelsy accepts Chris's sudden challenge. Chris hadn't expected him to agree and asks which student Ludger thinks will win the fight. Before hearing Ludger's bet, he wagers on Jevin Filio, believing him to be a talented student. Chris then asks if Ludger wants to change the terms of the bet and also place his stake on Jevin. Our hero states that there's no need, after all. He had planned to bet on Aiden from the start. The aristocrat considers Ludger to be too proud and asks what kind of bet he has in mind. Ludger proposes that they wager their magic research notes, as they both teach the same subject. With a condescending tone, Ludger Chelsy asks if Chris also teaches spell conjuration. This deeply infuriates Chris, wounding his inflated ego and filling him with rage toward Ludger. After that insult, he swears that he will not allow his opponent to leave the duel unscathed. In truth, Ludger hadn't known that Chris actually was a professor of spell conjuration. Thus, our protagonist suggests they hold the duel in 3 days, and both agree. Aiden apologizes to his professor, who tells him to find a way to win the fight. Ludger remarks that Jevin likely has a different starting advantage than the four-eyed boy. However, it is too soon to conclude Aiden's defeat. After all, there are always variables in battle. Aiden asks what those variables are, and Ludger tells him that he possesses them. He just needs to use them at the right moment. Feeling uncertain, the nerdy boy wonders if he can win by using his secret technique. However, he tells his professor that he would like to win using his own skills. Determined and resolute, he asks Ludger to teach him how to utilize his abilities. Recalling his past, Aiden had once received advice from a woman about using a technique. She had advised him to use it carefully, otherwise it would be extremely dangerous. Moreover, the woman had said it was her livelihood, and she didn't want to go hungry. She added that this didn't mean Aiden should never use the technique she had taught him. She even told him not to hesitate in moments when he truly felt it was necessary. As long as he was alive, there would be many moments when he would need to make decisions, and in those times, the woman's advice was for Aiden to follow what his heart told him. Returning to the present, our protagonist is shocked by the request of the bespectacled boy. After all, he accepted the bet because he believed in the nerdy boy's unusual magic. Seeing that Aiden wants to win with his own strength, he wonders if that magic isn't his strength. However, Ludger decides to accept this to test his special student's abilities. He comments that it will be torturous for Aiden and that there is no guarantee he will win. Seeing the boy determined to make this happen, Ludger decides to start training immediately. Knowing that the nobles are already celebrating their victory, he wants to see their faces in 3 days. Time passes and night falls while the bespectacled boy complains about exhaustion. Collapsed face first onto the bed, he comments that the training was even tougher than he expected. The boy wonders why Professor Ludger is so confident in his victory. He questions whether the professor understands how his unusual magic works. After all, few do. While burning papers, the noble comments that Ludger has stepped forward to train the commoner. Even without saying anything, Chris knows that Ludger Chelsy is desperate to win the duel. He deduces that Chris must have summoned him to ensure victory at all costs. But there is more. Chris wants Jevin Filio to showcase the stark difference between an aristocrat and a commoner. Confident they will win, he decides to guarantee Jevin's victory without a doubt. Thus, he takes a mana potion from his drawer and instructs Jevin to drink it before the fight. Worried, Jevin asks if he will be disqualified if he gets caught with the potion. Chris assures him that it is a special product from the Benamor family and that he won't get caught. He claims that the commoner will use every trick possible to win, so they must respond in kind. Jevin agrees with his professor. Even though it wounds his pride, he needs to win. With a wicked grin, Professor Chris tells Jevin Filio that he has made the right choice. At last, the day of the duel arrives, and everyone gathers at Soren's training grounds. Students in their classrooms discuss the duel and place bets on who they think will win. They mention that the commoner was involved in the werewolf incident and talk about his strength. They realize that Professor Ludger trained him directly, which impresses the students. They loudly ask who Professor Chris is, which wounds his pride and irritates him. They compare the two professors since both are responsible for the first years and teach the same subject. Chris wishes to defeat Ludger in front of everyone and crush his arrogance. The headmistress arrives at the training grounds and greets Professor Chris Benamor. Chris asks what she is doing there, and she replies that she came because of the event's buzz. Excited, she greets Ludger Chelsy and asks if everything is going well for him. She asks each person who they placed their bets on, and Ludger says he bet on Aiden. She states that she is eager to see the duel but prioritizes the safety of both students. A woman from Soren announces that she will set up a barrier to prevent the impact of attacks. At that moment, the competitors arrive, and Aiden is seen wearing metal armor. His friends cheer for him, urging him to crush the aristocrat's arrogance. Meanwhile, the nobles cheer for Jevin Filio, hoping he will bring honor to the nobility. The combat mediator arrives to check both competitors' conditions before the duel begins. Aiden tells Jevin that he better keep his promise, to which the noble responds with a threat. Confirming that both are in fighting condition, the mediator points at an item Aiden carries. He asks what it is, and the bespectacled boy explains that it is an individual staff he will use in the fight. The mediator comments that it looks like a sword, and Aiden clarifies that the staff is sword-shaped. Confirming the boy's statement, the referee notes that the sword has no sharp edge and is blunt. The judge declares that the first to have their protective magic drained will be the loser. As soon as he gives the signal to prepare and begin, Aiden immediately uses his staff to conjure magic. Jevin Filio, wielding a wand, responds by casting a spell of an opposing element. Leo and Tessie notice that both are casting at the same speed, and they are incredibly fast. Aiden had already expected Jevin to use a fire spell first, and a powerful one right from the start. Jevin did not expect the bespectacled boy's strength and realizes his element is at a disadvantage. However, he knows that this can change if he uses the same amount of mana as his opponent. At that moment, the aristocrat Jevin increases the mana output of his magic, overpowering Aiden. Seeing that he cannot match the spell's strength, Aiden swiftly dodges to the side. Jevin's fire blast narrowly misses him, and Aiden takes note of its significant destructive power. Casting another spell, the noble comments that this is the striking difference between the two. Quickly, the four-eyed boy responds by pointing his staff and casting another spell to defend himself. The two spells of similar elements collide, engaging in an intense battle. Tessie notices that Aiden is gradually losing ground, and the boy knows he will lose if this continues. So he decides to use what he learned from Professor Ludger to gain an advantage in the fight. He dispels his spell and starts running toward Jevin, who assumes he has given up on the fight. Arrogantly, Professor Chris admits that the plebeian boy, Aiden, has just lost at this moment. However, Chris is startled, his eyes widening as he witnesses an unexpected scene. The moment he sees Aiden conjuring magic within his staff, he cannot believe it. He cannot believe that this is Magus in motion, a technique used by mages in battle. He wonders how Ludger managed to teach this to Aiden in just 3 days. And more importantly, how could a mere plebeian maximize and master Magus in motion in just 3 days? Jevin knows that casting magic while running is difficult since it requires concentration. He decides not to be confused by the situation. After all, he has already completed the casting of his spell. With this, by launching his magic, he can disrupt Aiden's focus on Magus in motion. At high speed and with great dexterity, the four-eyed boy manages to dodge Jevin's spell. His technique cuts through Jevin Filio's conjured magic with ease. This shocks the noble boy, leaving him in disbelief at Aiden's overwhelming magical ability. The moment the plebeian boy reaches Jevin, his conjuration is completed at the tip of his sword. The magic cast from his tool is released and hits the noble square in the face. With a weak impact, he merely falls to his knees, and Aiden points his sword at Jevin's forehead. Speaking with conviction and a threatening tone, he declares, "Now it's your turn." Jevin, now fearful, pleads for him to wait. Suddenly, a loud, piercing cry echoes throughout the duel arena, and after that, the referee announces the winner of the match between the plebeian and the aristocrat. Lifting the four-eyed boy's arm, he declares him the victor of this duel. His friends, including Tessie and Leo, celebrate, cheering for their friend's victory. The nobles of Serin are disappointed in Jevin, believing he has tarnished their reputation. His noble peers see him as nothing more than a mere baron, and one who even lost to a plebeian. Jevin cannot believe he was defeated under these circumstances, and everyone feels ashamed of him. Tears stream down his face as he grits his teeth, unable to accept the duel's outcome. Jevin is convinced that Aiden must have cheated cheated, otherwise he could not have used Magus in motion. Unable to accept the result, Jevin decides to attack Aiden even after the duel has ended. Tessie and Leo are stunned and demand to know what Jevin Filio is doing, urging him to stop. The duel referee steps in front of the four-eyed boy while shouting for him to leave the arena. Through the lenses of his glasses, Aiden sees the reflection of Jevin's magic glow. He recalls his teacher's advice that while he lived, he would have to make choices, that when the time came to make such a decision, he should follow what his heart told him. Thus, he leaps forward, intercepting the spell and canceling it, as if cutting the flames in half with his sword. His sword holds and prevents the flames from spreading and harming anyone. Aiden puts in great effort to maintain control over the aristocrat's spell and remain unharmed, until he successfully suppresses his opponent's magic with relative ease. The students wonder if what just happened was Aiden cutting the magic itself. Ludger remarks that the boy is incredibly stubborn, and yet he still managed to use that technique at the crucial moment. Chris realizes that Aiden used anti-magic, a spell that cancels other spells, and is left in disbelief. Jevin Filio, the noble, starts trembling as he stares at the four-eyed boy and his unbelievable feat. Terrified, the noble takes a few steps back, but in a sudden movement, Aiden punches him. Jevin immediately collapses to the ground, and Aiden says he had hoped the noble would accept his defeat. With a look of deep contempt for the Baron, he says he never expected him to be this much of a coward. The other students laugh and comment that Jevin losing in this way is even more humiliating. One of them asks Freuden Wolfsburg, a second-year student at Serin, for his opinion. Freuden replies that he was never interested in the Baron Jevin from the start of the match. However, he now wants to keep an eye on the plebeian Aiden, because he is far better than any ordinary aristocrat. Freuden Wolfsburg and his friend Henry leave the training arena. Chris asks Ludger if he knew that a student could use anti-magic. Ludger says he doesn't understand Chris's fury, and that he never analyzed the student's personal data. Besides, he doesn't see why Chris is so angry, as anti-magic didn't impact Aiden's victory. Ludger brings up their bet regarding an academic study, and Chris asks if he wants something more. However, Ludger Chelsy declines, saying he never even wanted the professor's research. Stealing others' results as a bet prize is not Ludger's style. In shock, Professor Chris questions whether Ludger really said that about not being his style. He fills with rage at the insinuation that he would steal others' research. In the hallway, Ludger encounters the girl from the secret organization, who congratulates him on his victory. She also asks if he's okay with attracting Soren's attention with this result. Ludger says not only is he fine with it, but he also believes it benefits him. After all, Serin Academy's headmistress had been suspicious of him. Since the organization has existed for a long time, even a professor from Serin is under suspicion. However, if he gains positive recognition from the headmistress through these events, things will change. Since her opinion won't change suddenly, Ludger asks for Sedina's cooperation. After all, it's easy to attract suspicion by meeting with a student unrelated to him, but a professor naturally getting close to an outstanding student is much more reasonable. Our protagonist asks her to be the best and to show what it means to be a model student. Given that this is an assignment from the First Order, she decides to carry it out with great pleasure. When Ludger asks her not to get herself killed, she says she will avoid it as much as possible, with enthusiasm. Ludger accepts her weary response and notes that the girl is becoming more troublesome by the day. The recent event made it seem as if Ludger was on the headmistress's side, and it signaled to the Black Dawn that they could no longer act carelessly. However, our protagonist decides he cannot continue like this forever. He ponders and resolves that he must create his own organization as well. Before he can develop this idea, his communication orb begins to beep. Hans begins speaking, saying he checked the nearby areas as requested. He asks what they will do to maintain their position, as he is uncertain about the situation in the alleyways. Chelsy says it's time to use their power, and Hans responds that it's finally time to use their strength. Ludger says he is going now, and Hans asks if he's free, as he doubts the mission will be quick. Our protagonist assures Hans not to worry. It will be over soon. As night falls, the outside of a bar in the middle of the city comes into view. A man appears irritated, slamming his glass onto the table, and his friend asks if he's okay. A red-haired man with a goatee asks if he looks okay, his face clearly filled with rage. The redhead is furious. Belwort was eliminated before delivering the money, and their investment went to waste. He asks if there's another way while they spend what they still have. Then, the man says he called them together for that very reason, to expand their business. First, he decides to deal with those damn Black Rose members and glances back as he says it. Noticing someone entering the bar, he yells that the place is closed and tells the man to leave. As the well-dressed man approaches, the redhead shouts again, ordering him to get lost. The man in elegant clothing asks if the redhead is Duturi, the leader of the Red Society. Duturi replies that the man doesn't seem familiar and asks if they've met before. Ludger responds that they have never met, but he knows everything about Duturi because he is famous. Apologizing for not introducing himself sooner, he states that his name is James Moriarty. Duturi appears to recognize the name, the crime consultant who once controlled the alleyways of the Delica Kingdom. However, it has been years since he vanished, and the redhead wonders why he has appeared in this bar now. To be sure, Duturi starts acting friendly and says he is happy to see Professor Moriarty. However, he adds that he cannot determine whether the man's words are true. Ludger asks if he suspects him of being an imposter, and Duturi says appearing out of nowhere is suspicious. Our protagonist acknowledges that Duturi has a good reason to doubt him. Suddenly, All of Dutri's subordinates point their weapons at Ludger, who calmly suggests they lower them. Sighing, our hero comments that he doesn't think this is going to work. Dutri orders his men to shoot the man in the shoulder, and they attempt to obey. However, when they attempt to fire, the triggers of the weapon jam, and the shot is not executed. Now standing with a spell conjured in front of everyone, Ludger explains that this was the reason for his warning. In shock, Dutri wonders when exactly he used the fire silencer magic. Suddenly, something interrupts the moment, bursting into the bar and destroying the door. A fierce and wild werewolf appears at the entrance of the secret bar. As soon as it steps inside, everyone freezes in fear, watching in silence. The werewolf stops beside Ludger, making it clear that it is Hans, his ally. The henchmen assume that the recent werewolf incidents must have been orchestrated by the man in the top hat. Earlier, while speaking with Hans, Ludger had asked about the situation of the area. The Black Alley, where their hideout is located, is divided among 4 organizations. The largest of them is a gang called the Red Society, which handles dirty work and commands everything in the area. Ludger concluded that they would be his target, and that eliminating them would make things much easier. However, the Red Society is too large to be dealt with easily. Hans asks if they should start from the bottom, but Ludger dismisses the idea, saying it would be a waste of time. Going directly for the top would be the quickest approach. After all, without a leader, the rest would surrender. Hans remarks that this is a bad time for such an operation, and Ludger questions if this is because of Belfort's death. That's when he realizes that there seems to be a connection between the Red Society and Belfort. The incidents surrounding Rixen were likely the Red Society's dirty work. Moreover, with one of their major investors eliminated, they are probably furious. Ludger states that this is the perfect time to eliminate them, since they will all be gathering together. Hans warns that they aren't just some common gang. They possess the strength of mercenaries, not mere amateurs, but our protagonist argues that this doesn't necessarily mean they have knights on their side. Confused, Hans accepts Ludger's reasoning, and Ludger reinforces that while they might be strong. Because of that, Ludger Chelsy says he will need Hans's help. To create an intimidating atmosphere, the plan is for Hans to appear as a werewolf, though it will make him a target. In his beast form, Hans approaches Ludger and says he will flee if things escalate into a full fight. Dutri cannot determine whether the man is an imposter, but he does not underestimate his strength, seeing that he has a werewolf servant. With a laugh, the red-haired man apologizes for not recognizing a true noble. Now that he has theoretically proven his identity, Ludger states the reason for his visit. He declares that he wants to start a new business in the city. Dutri asks what kind of business he has in mind. Ludger delivers his message. He does not like dirty and disgusting things. In other words, he is saying that the Red Society will cease to exist today. In complete shock, Dutri orders his men to attack Ludger. Quickly, our hero uses his cane to strike the red-haired man directly in the stomach. The henchmen, both frightened and enraged, glare at Ludger, while Hans observes that they are not running away. When Ludger Chelsy tells his ally to prepare to escape, he slams his cane against the ground. At that moment, darkness consumes the entire area, causing the henchmen to panic. In shock, they cry out that they cannot see anything, that the lights have been completely extinguished. Meanwhile, our protagonist draws his sword, concealed within his cane. With the blade unsheathed, Ludger Chelsy gazes at the gang with a menacing expression. Then he unleashes a rank 3 dark magic spell, A Fool's Dream. Using darkness and shadows, it instills fear into the minds of weaker enemies. A curse-based spell, it causes its targets to hallucinate terrifying visions. As his enemies fall one by one, Dutri shouts for them to kill him quickly and to move faster. Terrified by the spell and the complete darkness, the henchmen lash out wildly, striking nothing but air. However, when one of them casts a purple spell, he successfully disperses the darkness with his sword. Now on the ground, trembling in fear, Dutri stares at Ludger standing tall, with nearly all of his men defeated. Dressed in elegant attire, our hero peers at Dutri through a monocle, his lips curling into a smirk. The remaining henchmen, having broken free of the magic, impulsively charge at him with swords. Ludger notices an aura capable of piercing through his magic and suspects that it might belong to an affiliated knight. While blocking their attack, Ludger does not believe he will lose to these so-called knights. With a confident expression, our protagonist lets a strange purple vial slip from his grasp, dropping it to the ground. The 2 remaining henchmen jump back evasively, fearing the object. They suspect it might be poison, and covering their bodies with magic won't help. They must dodge. As the men retreat, Ludger throws 2 sharp weapons in their direction. With his sword, one of the henchmen manages to deflect the item and claims Ludger's attempts are useless. However, the moment he speaks, his skin begins to melt, and purple smoke rises from it as he screams. The other henchman realizes that Ludger used the daggers as a distraction to let the poison take effect. After all, he knows they have no defense against poisons that activate upon direct contact. Even though he is poisoned, the henchman survives and starts looking around for his target. Completely consumed by rage, the subordinate shouts that he will eliminate Ludger Chelsy. At that exact moment, our hero reappears, and with his sword, finishes off the poisoned henchman. The last remaining subordinate and Dutri tremble in fear, stepping backward at the sight. While finishing off the poisoned man, Ludger coldly locks eyes with the remaining 2. With a single circular motion, he pulls his weapon from the man and tosses the body to the ground. Dutri asks if he is really Professor Moriarty. After all, he wasn't supposed to be skilled in combat. Ludger asks if there is any reason to explain this, considering they are both going to be eliminated anyway. The purple-haired man notices that Ludger exposes his opponent's weaknesses through fear. However, if he remains cautious of this tactic, he might still win the fight. First, he decides to close the distance and rushes toward his opponent at full speed. Our hero responds by throwing another vial of the purple substance. As he charges at Ludger, the henchman yells that this won't work on him. After all he needs to do is dodge. He does so, but his sword accidentally strikes the vial. The moment he hears the sound, the henchman looks at his sword and realizes it touched the poison. As the man gets distracted by the poison, Ludger pulls out his golden firearm. Panicking, the henchman decides to drop his sword and dodge a shot with his reflexes. However, a massive impact follows, and the henchman's eyes widen in shock. A sword made of shadows pierces through his body, and ketchup drips from his mouth. Looking behind him, he realizes that the sword emerged from his own shadow and impaled him. In his mind, magic was supposed to be conjured through the mage's physical body. He never knew this was possible. At that moment, Ludger, who had been staring at him with cold seriousness, fires his gun. As the henchman's body collapses lifelessly, Ludger shifts his aim toward Duchery. Standing right in front of him, the red-haired man is trembling on the ground, completely paralyzed with fear. Our protagonist asks if now is a good time to finish their conversation. Time passes, and we see our hero filling a glass with distilled liquor. Ludger asks if Hans has dropped his disguise, and Hans confirms it. After all, the smell of ketchup was making him nauseous. Hans notes that Duchery screamed a lot and asks if he is still alive. Ludger says he is. After gathering information from the redhead, he considers handing him over to other organizations. Hans agrees, knowing that Ludger will handle the situation, and asks what he is drinking. His friend replies that it's a 38-year-old Gorgonia, and surprised, Hans asks for a glass. Drinking together, Hans asks what Ludger plans to do with the rest of the Red Society. Ludger says he intends to select a few members and find some good people within the group. Ludger informs him that there are documents and a secret ledger in the second-floor office. Hans notices that it's a lot and asks if this isn't too much work for just the two of them. Ludger replies that he has already thought about that and knows many people who can help. Hans is certain that there is no one better for this job and asks if they will respond to Ludger. Ludger says they will come after they finish their own tasks and questions Hans's hatred for them. Hans says that there isn't a single sane person among them, making his conflicting feelings obvious. Despite his complaints, Hans decides to follow his friend's plan and mentions the headmistress's suspicions. His friend reassures him that they won't try to track them. Mages wouldn't take a risk without certainty. Also, since the headmistress is under opposition surveillance, she won't do anything that could backfire on her. Hans acknowledges that everything seems fine and asks for the name of Ludger's organization. Ludger hasn't thought of one yet. His friend remarks that since Ludger intends to take control of Leafville, he will need a name. Hans asks how many members this organization has, and Ludger says there are 10 people. Ludger says he has an idea and names the organization UN Owen, but Hans doesn't understand the name. He asks if Ludger wants a name that sounds unknown and strange to others, and Ludger says that's the idea. While pouring himself another drink, his friend says he likes the name UN Owen. With another drink in hand, his friend asks if this will be the last one for today. Already with another drink, Ludger Chelsy excitedly agrees with his friend. Thus, the two friends toast their alcohol-filled glasses in honor of the new organization. The pink-haired professor asks why Ludger doesn't have an assistant. He says he never felt the need for one, but Selena argues that he has 80 students. In response, Ludger says it's not that difficult, and Selena admires him for that. Internally, Ludger is shocked by the fact that he could have had an assistant all this time and had been working so hard for nothing. So he asks if the professor has any assistants, and she confirms that she does. Saying she doesn't need much help, she reveals that she has 3 assistants, and Ludger can't believe it. That is until he sees how many assistants Chris Benamore has and realizes that 3 is actually a small number. The professors encourage him to get assistants since things get harder when working alone. His colleagues say they will make a list of good students for the role. Ludger discovers that assistants receive extra points, and that even new professors have at least 6. Some students choose to research magic under their professors instead of graduating, similar to a university system. He concludes that it would be good to have someone handle the smaller tasks. Struggling to pick a student, he remembers that he has a list with several names. Even though it's not urgent, he decides to check the list and is immediately surprised by one name. Seeing the name of a certain boy, he decides to go find the student walking through Soren's corridors. As he walks, our protagonist notices someone and tells them to come out at once. The infiltrating girl starts trembling and apologizes for hiding from Ludger. He wonders if she has nothing better to do than follow her professor. However, Ludger says it's fine and decides to ask the infiltrating girl a question. He asks if she has any classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 10 a.m. to noon. She realizes those are the first order class times and says she's free. Ludger is satisfied with the answer and asks the girl to be his assistant in class. Standing face to face with a first order professor and receiving such an honorable request, the girl screams with joy. Ludger tells her that if she becomes his assistant, she can get closer to him more naturally. The girl tries to justify that she has no connection to Ludger Ludger and that it would be suspicious. The professor tells her not to worry, as she was on the list he received. He says that if she doesn't want to, he won't force her, but the girl quickly denies it and accepts immediately. Seeing how instantly she agreed, he asks her to bring the documents in 2 days. Ludger is happy with his assistant, who will also provide him with information about the Black Dawn. He is pleased that his first assistant will become his loyal subordinate in 2 days. An hour passes at Serin Academy, and the determined girl already has the paperwork in hand. The professor is even shocked by how quickly she got the registration done and thanks her. After acquiring an assistant, his class is about to begin, and the room is already full. The students notice that the classroom is noisier than usual due to strange rumors. It's about the rumor that Professor Ludger is looking for assistants. The girl says it's quite tempting since he didn't have an assistant until now. She mentions that people thought Ludger didn't even know assistants existed, but the other girl doubts that. Even so, the blonde says there's an even more famous rumor going around. The rumor that the Universal Stone, which grants wishes, is hidden inside Serin. Her friend asks if it really exists, and the other affirms that there are many secrets yet to be revealed. Besides, Serin is a center of magic, so such an artifact could exist, even if exaggerated. Flora finds it childish to believe in the Universal Stone and thinks the nobility would already possess such an object. Either way, the most special professor in the school is selecting assistants. Assistants earn credits with the professor, meaning they need a lot of skill, just like her. It's definitely something Flora Lumos would consider if personally recommended. Some students shout that the professor is arriving and demand silence, which irritates Flora. The students notice the new, timid girl and wonder who she is, and if she is the assistant. Flora Lumos is shocked to see that Professor Ludger has already chosen his assistant. Saying that Senita did a good job, he tells her she can leave the room. Professor Ludger wonders why his students look so surprised. He instructs his class to focus and pay attention as the lesson is about to begin. Some time passes, and Ludger ends the class by saying that the day's material will appear on the test. A student says she has a question, and Ludger recognizes her as Julia Plumhart, who feels honored. Ludger remembers her because the magic tower supports her, and she ranked first in the entrance exam. She says her question isn't anything major and asks how he chose his assistant. The professor is surprised but expected this type of question, answering that he made the choice privately. Julia asks whether his decision was based on skill or reputation. Ludger realizes the question isn't just out of curiosity. There's some malice behind it. He states that the only thing he considers when selecting an assistant is their character. However, he mentions that they must pass an interview and says that after Julia's question, she wouldn't even need one. After all, she seems like the type who wouldn't be Professor Ludger Chelsy's assistant. He concludes by saying that if there are no further questions, he is leaving the classroom. Additionally, he notifies them that their first exam is approaching and advises them to prepare. As he exits the classroom, he notices his assistant waiting outside. He tells Senita not to wait in the hallway next time, but in the faculty room instead. The girl seems to struggle to communicate something to Professor Ludger, stammering a lot. She says it's nothing important and wishes Professor Chelsy good work. Aside from that, our protagonist hands over some paperwork to his assistant. As Senita leaves, Flora Lumos appears and calls out to her professor. Flora says she has heard about Ludger's assistant, and he asks if she's interested in the position too. Embarrassed, Flora denies having any interest, and Ludger questions why she came to see him. She approached him to thank him for saving her life and appreciates the advice he gave her. Ludger says he only did what a professor should do and that it's good she takes his advice seriously. Flora asks if he's okay, considering he used more mana than her. Our hero says he feels great, but deep down, he knows he almost passed out. Flora Lumos asks how many elements the professor can control since he used 5 in class. The protagonist says those are the only 5 elements he can control. In reality, he can control all 10 elements, but typically, a mage only masters one. Or at most, a secondary character might control just 1 element. If his students found out, he'd be in danger, so he decided to keep it a secret. Flora is surprised, and Ludger says he's leaving since she has no more questions. He also tells her that if she changes her mind, the selection for assistants is still open. Our protagonist states that Flora Lumos would certainly be qualified to be his assistant. The girl seems unsettled by Professor Ludger Chelsy's statement. Unable to respond, she frowns, finding it extremely irritating. Sometime later, Ludger goes to the headmistress's office after being summoned. She welcomes the professor and asks if he has heard the latest rumors. Rumors about the Universal Stone being hidden inside Serin Academy. Ludger says he's heard of it and thinks it's just a false rumor spread by the students. The headmistress comments that this assumption is incorrect. The Wishing Stone does, in fact, exist. A mysterious object with a unique power that has been around for a long time, which Ludger refers to as a relic. Elisa Willow adds that it is a very ancient relic with an unknown origin. The power of the stone is said to be 100 times stronger than any artifact a mage could craft. Ludger asks if the relic is in Serin's possession, and Elisa confirms that it has been for a long time. However, it was a closely guarded secret, and if it turned into a rumor, it means the information was leaked. Ludger assumes someone must have revealed the secret, but Elisa suggests there could be other explanations. Since the stone is extremely powerful, maintenance and security are mandatory in the area where it is kept. The information might have leaked during the stone's transport while the room was under maintenance. However, given the specific nature of the rumor, Elisa wants Ludger to investigate its origins. On the outside, our master of disguise notices that the headmistress is showing trust by entrusting this task to him. However, she isn't the type to trust him just because he is is on her side. She might be trying to investigate our protagonist's background through this seemingly innocent request. He is asked to either find someone suspicious or help during the transport of the relic. Ludger asks if another professor is involved, and Elisa confirms that there is. However, since they all belong to different fields, they won't cross paths at any other time. Elisa advises him to act normally until the day of the relic's transport, which will take a while. Ludger thinks about the information leak within Serin, wondering if the Black Order is making a move. With no contact from Senida, he questions whether it's another First Order member or some other reason entirely. An incident could happen at any moment, and decides he hadn't expected to find a relic there. Our protagonist has been changing his identity while traveling through various regions, sometimes as a mercenary, other times as a crime consultant, and even as a merchant. There was a reason why he had wandered the world under so many different identities. That reason was to find the missing piece of the relic. He came here because he had heard a rumor about an artifact within the Empire. However, he never imagined he would find it in Serin, even if it was a different relic from the one he was searching for. Still, he believes he can use the Universal Stone to locate the missing piece of the relic he seeks. Hans contacts him again through the magic globe, telling his friend that everything has been cleaned up. Hans says the other organizations seem quiet after the fall of the Red Society, and the organizations trying to take the Red Society's place have gone mad. He asks his friend if he has time to help with this, and Ludger says he can assist in a week. Finally, Hans asks if anything has happened at Serin, and Ludger mentions the relic at the Academy. Hans is outraged that his friend Ludger goes through more trouble than he does. He says it's not normal for a school to have a relic and jokes that the headmistress must have a secret dungeon. Ludger judges Hans, who says he's just kidding, then mentions he's going to see a woman and tells his friend to do the same. The protagonist reflects that he would help Hans right now, but he decides not to, following the headmistress's orders. Looking at the piece of his relic, he wonders if the Universal Stone could be an opportunity. After all, magical artifacts are not easy to find. He himself has only discovered 3. Judging by the size and shape of the relic, he estimates that 4 more pieces are missing. Once he finds all 7 pieces, his relic will finally be complete. Our hero keeps secret what will happen once he gathers all 7 pieces of the artifact. In a very luxurious place, a butler asks if the princess needs anything, but she declines. Herender von Exilian feels exhausted and irritated because no one ever leaves her alone. However, she knows that in her position, nothing can be done to change this, and she wishes for a normal life. Someone interrupts her thoughts, informing her that someone is calling for Princess Exilian. Tarina Lionhowl apologizes for calling the princess so late but warns that it's urgent. The princess asks her to continue, and Tarina says she has seen the werewolf incident and asks if it is true. Herender Exilian confirms that it is true and says that one of her professors at Serin handled the situation. Tarina says she is investigating a similar case, though the details are confidential. Regardless, she wishes to meet this professor soon and asks who he is. Herender replies that it is a new professor, Ludger Chelsy, and Tarina hopes the investigation goes well. Finally, Tarina mentions that the first princess is waiting for Herender to contact her. After all, the first princess is sad that Herender hasn't called her recently. Tired, Princess Herender von Exilian agrees, and Tarina ends the call. She decides to call her sister. After all, saying this through Tarina means that her sister cares about her. She informs others that she will meet the professor who handled the incident. Tarina then questions Irina about the factory investigation, and Irina says she analyzed burned documents. She says something was being developed, but the details were impossible to discern. Tarina adds that it's as if there were no clues, making it impossible to continue. Irina further notes that the Red Society, a back alley group, vanished overnight. Even though it has nothing to do with the case, Irina says they might still take it into account. The commander says they should focus on their own investigation and not worry about that. She instructs them to investigate further in Lippevel and then return to Serin, and they obey. While teaching his class, the protagonist thinks about the recent rumors. He fears that students might act on their own, just like in the werewolf incident. After reflecting on this, the professor notices his students looking uninterested and bored. Noticing the lack of attention in the classroom, he decides to show them something interesting. Thus, he explains that mages always manifest magic using themselves as the center. After all, magical power comes from the caster, but he manifests fire on another person, startling them. Ludger explains that by shifting the magical center, it is possible to do something similar to what he did. Magic is typically manifested using the mage as the center, but there is an empty space regarding this. Commonly, the limit is 1 meter, but if desired, the range can be extended at the cost of more mana. Ludger calls it the coordinate formula, and his students are shocked, having never heard of it before. Flora, outraged that she has never heard of this, questions where Ludger learned such a technique. Even though it piques the student's interest, he says it is merely a minor modification to magic. It was inspired by a certain mage, and while Ludger demonstrated it, he does not intend to teach his students. The students are stunned by the fact that he refuses to teach them this the technique. He wants them to realize that all magic is developed from a solid foundation. To use magic correctly, they must learn step by step before using such tricks. Even if they find it tedious or think he is stating the obvious, they must focus on the lesson for their future. Some time passes, and he ends the class, saying that if anyone figures out the formula, they can visit his office. If any student manages to do so, they will earn several merit points as a reward. When Ludger Chelsy opens his office door, Zenita is already there waiting for him. The professor is startled, and the girl starts stammering as someone attempts to communicate through the globe. Thus, the protagonist asks his assistant to wait outside, and she obeys. Ludger creates a sound barrier, knowing it is nearly time for them to contact him. The headmistress of Serin says she has something urgent to discuss with him. She states that the universal wishing stone has been stolen and admits to underestimating their enemies. When questioned about the incident, she reveals that they already knew about the stone's reserve chamber. The enemies attacked before Serin Academy could even make a move. Despite rumors spreading, Elisa believed everything would be fine if they acted quickly. However, that assumption turned into a costly mistake, resulting in the loss of the relic. She says they are pursuing the culprits, but if they use the stone, they will be in grave danger. Ludger asks how much time Elisa thinks they have, and she responds, until midnight. She asks if Ludger has any further questions, but he decides it's better to act than to keep asking. Elisa then entrusts him with handling the situation and ends the call. Our protagonist had anticipated this happening. He just didn't expect it to happen so quickly. The disguised professor knows he may still be on Headmistress Elisa's list of suspects. Seeing how quickly they moved and how strange the situation is, he wonders if it was the First Order. Thinking things through, he decides to call Zenita into his office, and she appears almost immediately. Bluffing, he claims that a subordinate acted on their own and demands that she explain everything. She agrees, saddened, and he tells her to recount exactly what happened. Through investigation, it seems everything started when a Third Order member sought information. That person found a document referencing the Universal Stone while investigating Serin. Coincidentally, rumors about the stone's existence began spreading among the students. Since they already had some knowledge, they believed in the rumors and later discovered the stone's location. That Third Order member immediately informed someone from the Second Order. However, the Second Order member failed to report it, and the two began acting independently. The name of this person is Demolus, someone close to the government who handles such matters with the Second Order. Ludger says that if it was such an important matter, they should have reported it to a First Order member. He asks Zenita if she knows why they acted without informing anyone. Zenita believes they are aiming to reach First Order status. After all, Order Zero has stated that the 7 First Order positions are always subject to change. Even though Demolus is greedy, he isn't talented enough, so perhaps he is after something even greater. When Ludger asks for their current position, Zenita questions whether he intends to act alone now. He confirms it, stating that they are already after him, and if he makes a mistake, their identities could be exposed. The only information his assistant has is that after stealing the item, they fled to the Silent Forest. Standing up from his desk, he says he is heading there, and Zenita asks what she should do. Ludger tells her that since she has done an excellent job providing information, she doesn't need to do anything else. He wishes his assistant good work and says he will leave the rest to her. Shy and emotional, the girl thanks her master, her eyes brimming with tears. As he leaves the room, the protagonist wonders why she made such a face over such simple words. He thought it was just loyalty to the First Order, but she seems to have her own motives. What matters now and keeps our hero focused is resolving this situation. He arrives at a certain place and casts at her Nocturnus, a dark magic spell. The darkness invoked by the spell spreads across the area, concealing Professor Ludger Chelsy. As night falls, Ludger explains that this is a magic from the summoning tree. Known as Magical Path, it consumes a large amount of magical power. However, in exchange, it completely erases the presence of the caster. No one can recognize or detect them. Thus, Ludger is able to move freely through Serin at night, passing unnoticed by his students. However, Flora Lumos senses something strange, and her friend asks what's wrong. Flora felt something pass by, but she didn't see anything and could tell it was related to magic. She realizes it must be invisibility magic and decides to chase after it. Her friend yells, asking where she's going, but Flora doesn't answer and starts running. The guards know they went toward the Silent Forest and question whether they should have brought more people. They wonder why such a forest still exists, as they have tried to destroy it many times. No matter how much they try, the forest grows back rapidly, and those who enter return insane. Blocking the entrance was the best solution the guards could come up with, yet Ludger entered anyway. In the silence of the cold night, one of the men begins to lose his mind, while another tries to help him. A man from the organization asks Demolus what to do, as they have been surrounded from the outside. Completely enraged, Demolus orders the man to shut up and says he already has a plan. Utterly losing his composure, he realizes they spoke about the Universal Stone, but it seems useless. He can tell that the power radiating from the stone is real, yet it isn't reacting to anything. Suddenly, someone appears, startling all the members of the secret organization. With disdain, Ludger questions whether these are truly all the men who stole the stone. He says he expected at least 10 of them, and asks if the rest were captured or abandoned. Demolus is completely terrified, trembling as he recognizes him as Mr. Mr. John Doe. The protagonist looks him up and down and reprimands him, calling him second order. Demolus is in shock upon seeing John Doe, knowing his ruthless reputation. He is absolutely certain he will be eliminated and begins to shake uncontrollably. When asked if he understands why John Doe has come personally, he is unable to answer. So he kneels and extends his hands, offering up the relic known as the Universal Stone. The First Order member looks at him with contempt, says that Demolus has done well, and takes the stone. At the exact moment he takes the artifact from the Second Order's hands, he eliminates all the traitors. Before he is killed, Demolus asks why the First Order is doing this. Swiftly taking the stone from Demolus's hands, our hero does not answer the question. Demolus insists on knowing why, but Ludger says it would be a waste of time to explain it to him. Upon analyzing it closely, our protagonist realizes this is the real Universal Stone. However, he is shocked to discover that this stone is not actually a relic. It holds a tremendous amount of magical power, but that is all it is. Just as he begins to recall what his headmistress had said, the sky above Ludger turns pink. A massive pink magical beam shoots down from the sky, heading straight for the disguised professor. It tears through the sky with immense force and speed, annihilating everything it touches. Upon impact, the pink-colored magic explodes, creating a massive shockwave across the forest. A giant crater appears on the ground where our protagonist and the Universal Stone once stood. The green Universal Stone remains completely intact despite the magical explosion. A woman states that she fired the magic with full force, yet it didn't even scratch the stone. Elisa, the headmistress of Serin, picks up the Universal Stone in her hands and declares the situation over. Now that Headmistress Elisa has taken the fake Universal Stone, she acknowledges the effort put into creating this decoy. She hopes this situation has worked in her favor and also hopes that Ludger wasn't caught in the blast. In a tree far from the headmistress, we see our hero, shrouded in the darkness of his magic, completely exhausted. Shocked and drained, the protagonist knows that he barely made it out and almost met his end. When the professor saw the energy wave approaching, he instantly cast Aether Nocturnus. Thus, the destructive magic recognized his spell as part of its magic system, allowing him to survive. In this world, teleportation magic does not exist. However, by using coordinate-based formulas alongside this magic, it is possible to escape from anything. Headmistress Elisa Willow is a rank 6 mage and possesses overwhelming power. He wonders why she appeared since she was the one who assigned Ludger this mission. The much-discussed stone was fake, and he questions whether she set a trap after discovering his identity. Suddenly, the long-haired man begins to feel an intense headache and reaches for his vial. This happens because the dark and concealment magic drained a significant amount of his energy all at once. He quickly drinks the substance to recover his mana and avoid fainting. Reflecting on the situation, Ludger doesn't believe the headmistress would use such a troublesome method. Possibly from the beginning, she intended to handle everything on her own. She hides the truth even from her own allies to ensure greater efficiency in the mission. Professor Ludger considers Headmistress Elisa Willow to be a truly extraordinary person. Suddenly, he senses a presence nearby and raises his cane to defend himself. Flora Lumos appears, startled by her professor's reaction, while he is shocked to see her. He immediately asks why she is in the forest since she is outside the permitted boundaries. Dodging the question, the student asks why Ludger is there and what kind of enormous magic that was. The professor replies that it is none of Flora's concern, as the forest is dangerous for students. Even though the girl claims to be strong, Ludger notices that she hasn't seen anything suspicious. He wonders if she discovered a way to bypass the guards at the entrance. Flora cannot explain how she ended up there. She simply felt a strange energy and didn't expect to see Ludger. Her friend suddenly appears, running and calling out Flora's name in concern. Panicked, the girl said she was terrified and asks where Flora had gone. Ludger orders both of them to follow him so he can escort them back to the exit. Flora Lumos says nothing, but she saw Professor Ludger taking those suspicious pills. She questions whether the professor is ill and what kind of medicine he was taking. The headmistress notices Ludger's presence and immediately asks what the two students are doing there. Our hero explains that they were wandering through the forest, so he decided to bring them here. Coldly, the headmistress asks why the girls were walking around the silent forest. Flora quickly takes the blame before Headmistress Elisa Willow, while her friend tries to stop her. She admits that she entered the silent forest alone, and that Cheryl merely followed her there. She also explains that soon after, Professor Ludger Chelsy found and helped them. Silently analyzing Flora's response, the headmistress says she understands. Ludger asks how they should proceed, and Elisa says that students make mistakes sometimes. Elisa comments that the situation was extremely urgent, but she has already taken care of it. Our hero concludes that the magic from earlier was cast by the headmistress. Now that he knows it was her, Ludger can be sure that everything is under control. He takes responsibility for the two students and decides to escort them back to the dormitory. Elsewhere, the headmistress is seen talking to Wolford, who asks what she thinks of Ludger. She says she can dismiss any suspicions since she observed his reaction and found nothing strange. Wolford smiles and comments that this is a relief. After all, there is no one quite like Ludger Chelsy. Even so, the old man questions whether there was a reason for the rumors being spread from their side. Elisa, the headmistress, states that it was necessary to make the rats run straight into the trap. After her chilling remark, Wolford says he understands, and they continue walking. They arrive at a room where the real Universal Stone has been safely relocated. Willa thanks God that nothing happened to the stone. After all, in the past, This relic was so dangerous that it destroyed an entire kingdom. Now that she knows the real one is secure, the headmistress prefers to leave the room as soon as possible. As soon as she exits, shadows shift within the supposedly secure chamber containing the stone. Within seconds, our protagonist materializes inside the room where the stone is kept. He says he didn't believe it at first, but he correctly pinpointed the stone's true location. He thanks himself for having placed a tracker on the stone, assuming the headmistress would check on the real one. Seeing it up close, he notes that the magical power of the real stone is far superior to the fake one. It is draining his strength, yet even so, it will not be able to grant his true wish. He can affirm this due to his vast experiences. There is a clear limit to its power. However, it does have the capability to show him the locations of the missing fragments of his relic. Our hero places his hand on the real universal stone, and it emits an intense light. He senses more magical energy gathering within it, attempting to sneak into his body. He commands it to stay put. If it tries to merge with him, it will break regardless of any wish. With this command and his strong intent, Ludger successfully controls the universal stone and feels pleased. Controlling the stone, the mage asks for the whereabouts of the missing pieces of the artifact. Letting go of the stone, he had already expected that it wouldn't reveal the full truth to him. Even so, he catches a glimpse of one of the pieces and notices that it is very close to where he is. Back in his office, his friend Hans asks Ludger what happened. Ludger says that the mission is finally over and that they can continue their plans the next day. Hans thinks that's for the best, as they are almost at the time limit, and asks why his friend's voice sounds weak. Exhausted, Ludger says that not everything went perfectly, but he still managed to locate the relic. However, recovering the pieces will be difficult since he has been working too much lately. Hans says he understands. After all, a lot has happened, and it's not worth all that effort just to retrieve a single piece. To be precise, Ludger obtained information on 2 pieces, but the second one wasn't clear, and the other missing piece is in Liefeld, which surprises Hans. From the vision the relic showed him, he presumes the artifact is inside the auction house. Kunst Auction House is the only one in the region, and a major event will be held there soon. Ludger assumes it must be an item in the auction catalog and asks Hans to look into it. Saying that verifying this will be simple, Hans tells Ludger that he will see him the next night. As morning arrives, Ludger finds it strange that Flora is standing in front of his office. Shocked, the girl had assumed her professor was inside, and he asks what she wants. Lumos hesitates about what to say first and wonders if she should ask about the special magic he used yesterday. She also considers asking about the medicine she saw him taking in the forest. Deciding not to ask directly, she hesitates, but Ludger pressures her, saying he is going inside. Flora tells him to wait, saying she has a question, but Ludger doesn't want to hear any nonsense. Suddenly, a water-based magic spell is cast in front of Ludger Chelsy. 3 different elemental magics manifest before the professor, cast by the student. She asks what he thinks of her coordinate-based formula for invoking magic in another location. Ludger is caught off guard, not expecting his students to already be putting his teachings into practice. Flora assumes she is a genius. After all, she is the only student to have accomplished such a feat and demands extra points. Ludger offers to reward her with the highest grade he can give and asks if that's enough. She considers it a waste to receive only a grade increase for her efforts and wants something more, something similar to a grade boost, and upon hearing this, Ludger allows Flora to enter his office. As she starts thinking, the girl realizes that she has never stepped inside Professor Chelsy's office before. Our protagonist leads her toward the laboratory, and she doesn't understand why. Upon opening the door to the dark laboratory, she wonders what he is researching. Being honest, the professor hadn't expected anyone to succeed, so he had never planned a reward. As the student knows, the coordinate formula is a mathematical equation used to control mana. Flora had simply copied what she saw, so Ludger decides to show her something now that she understands the formula. At that moment, the protagonist waves his wand, using magic to draw something. The student is shocked as a strange and incomprehensible pattern gleams before her. She feels an unusual sensation, as if her head is about to split in 2 just by looking at it. Immediately after, the girl faints and wakes up in Ludger's office, covered with his coat. Confused, she asks how much time has passed, and the professor tells her about 30 minutes. She asks what the hell that magic was before she lost consciousness. Her professor explains that it was the Klein bottle, that's what he calls it. It was something he had seen before and decided to recreate, just as an experiment. Flora freaks out upon learning that he did that as an experiment, and Ludger asks if her nose is fine. She doesn't understand, so he asks if she has the unique trait of feeling all the sensations of magic. Ludger assumes this because he saw her pupils dilating and her hands trembling uncontrollably. He imagines that she perceived the formula in a different way than usual, shocked that she had never experienced anything like it before. The girl asks if her professor is curious about her special trait, but the protagonist responds that he is not interested in any of that. However, that may not be the case for other mages, and he advises her to be careful about it. Saying that it's getting late, Ludger Chelsy suggests that Flora leave his office. Flora wonders how he can be so calm after discovering her unique ability. She questions whether he has met someone like her before, which would explain his composed reaction. Stopping to think, Flora doesn't feel she was properly rewarded for her achievement. Ludger meets Hans and still can't get used to his well-dressed appearance. Excited to see his great friend, Hans asks if Ludger is going to continue dressing like this. His friend quickly responds that he will, and we notice the top hat and monocle from before. Ludger questions how Hans got the car, and he says he acquired it through high society. After all, the occasion of the auction calls for it, and surprisingly, Ludger Chelsy agrees with him. Entering the car, the two friends set off and soon arrive in front of the Kunst auction house. As soon as they enter, the professor comments on how crowded and noisy the place is. Hans argues that it's a famous location and better than being filthy and rundown. He asks which floor the auction will be on, and his friend replies that it will take place on the 4th floor of the building. 2 security guards stop them, saying they can't proceed without permission. Hans shows 2 tickets and states that since they have them, they can enter without any trouble. The security guards allow them through, and Ludger feels a strange sensation in the air. His friend mentions that he heard this place is being used for secret group meetings. Because of that, an unwritten rule has been put in place, and Ludger asks what that rule is. His good friend explains that it's a non-aggression rule on the 4th floor, which is why there are no guards there. Ludger suspects that there's a reason they were invited to see if they would follow this rule. Hans points to the meeting area, where several ominous figures are gathered inside, and they decide to enter. A woman states that James Moriarty, the disguise Ludger is using, is not lying. After all, she heard about his disappearance as soon as he failed to start a war in the kingdom of Delica. Violetta asks why he is here today. Does he plan to accomplish what he previously failed to do? Our protagonist, disguised as Moriarty, says no, claiming he never had any such intentions. Violetta doesn't believe him after all. He destroyed the Red Society as soon as he arrived in Lithel. Quickly, he responds that he merely cleaned up the filth that was in front of him. Kirikis questions what Moriarty's motivation was in accepting their invitation to the auction. Noting the dwarf's quick response, he says he intends to rebuild his influence in the region. Kirikis Pinion asks if James Moriarty plans to create a second Red Society. Dian from the old boys group remains silent, observing the conversation between the two. Denying Kirikis' question, he says he understands why the atmosphere is so tense. He decides to clear up the misunderstanding, and Dian asks what misunderstanding he's referring to. However, before answering, the protagonist states that he wants to have a private conversation. Mistella, Dian's granddaughter, tells her grandfather that it's fine. Everyone underestimates her because of her age. Moriarty says that his life has never been easy, so he never underestimates children. Additionally, he reaffirms that he has no intention of creating a second Red Society. Of course, he does plan to establish a new business, which is why he wants to present them with an offer, promising that they will earn a great deal of money. He asks them to work for him. Hans didn't expect this and becomes tense, seeing how his friend suddenly started talking out of nowhere. Violetta states that in this case, he is no different from the Red Society. She asks if he intends to attack them and force them to follow his will, just like the other group did. James Moriarty replies that it is merely an offer. If he wanted to attack them, he would have done so already. Even if they reject his offer, he will still give them a portion of the Red Society's business. Mistella doesn't understand what he plans to do since he is willing to give them that even if they refuse. He admits that he is in a difficult position, as they all already know, for him to be acting this way. He won't gain anything from pointless conflicts, which is why he needs his own power. He states that they don't have to believe him, and he also has nothing to lose if they decide to trust him. With that, he says he wants to hear their response, and the dining hall falls silent for a moment. Pinion says that he should talk about the business first, and Violetta dislikes that he decided that on his own. The dwarf states that if it's something dangerous, it will be a problem for him, but Ludger assures them there is no risk for anyone. James, still in disguise, asks what kind of leisure activities nobles seek. The dwarf answers that it's opera and music. Moriarty says that he doesn't want them to do just that. He envisions something more elegant, a theatrical performance with music and dance. Pinion, the dwarf, becomes excited upon seeing that James thought of everything and even put it on paper. Our hero looks forward to working with the small-statured man, while Violetta asks what Moriarty really wants from this place. He states that he wants to change this area, removing the industries and forges, as it is an abandoned zone. Right now, only a gray sky and an uncertain, bleak future await those in Lithvel. He asks if they don't think people should live looking up at the sky. He wishes to transform these dark alleyways into a place where people can live brightly. He also intends to provide a suitable business plan for other organizations. He asks them to read through the paperwork first before deciding if they want to be part of his business. Hans praises the ideas presented by his dear friend, which earned the approval of 3 groups. Ludger says that all he did was use other people's ideas as inspiration. Our protagonist asks what Violet wants, as she followed him alone and without a guard. Violet wants to speak privately with him, so he tells his friend to go on ahead. She asks if Moriarty truly believes the business he proposed will succeed. When asked if she thinks it will fail, Violet says that the clothing market is controlled by the nobility. This makes her question whether there will be space for them, but Ludger says the nobles are not their target audience. What he intends to create is comfortable clothing for people to wear in their daily lives. After all, if enough people start looking for it, fashion will naturally change. Violet argues that they won't be able to prevent others from interfering with them. Ludger tells her that she will have to overcome that at some point. She can't live in the shadows forever. He says she doesn't need to worry about protecting her sisters because he will take care of it if she accepts the offer. Our protagonist tells her that once the business opens, she can apply her magic to the clothing. She asks how he knew about that, and the disguised man simply says that a mage recognizes another mage. Since Violet has now accepted working with James, she decides not to hide it from him forever. At that moment, the woman removes the black veil from her face, revealing her true appearance, marked by scars. She explains that a possessive mage, the one who taught her magic, was the one who did this to her. Because she didn't treat it in time, even the Lumensis apostle healers gave up on curing the magical wound. Before Violet could return to the subject, our hero stops her and holds her hand. Holding her face, he tells her that since she has shown him something personal, he will do the same. She is confused as the protagonist runs a finger over her scar, conjuring a magic spell. Completely stunned, Violet cannot believe that he was able to heal her scar just like that. Ludger tells her to look at her face, and in a mirror, Violet sees that the wound is gone, asking how he did it. Ludger responds briefly that this is real magic. He adds that it's a waste for her to hide her face because of a scar. Violet says that, if anything, she now feels more comfortable keeping her face covered, and Ludger respects her decision. The woman says she will take care of the business now, and thanks him for the important meeting. At that moment, the disguised hero suddenly shouts to get Violet's attention. Then he grabs her and pulls her away just as a projectile was about to hit her. The woman is shocked when she notices an arrow embedded in the wall right where she had been standing. It would have been fatal. Moriarty asks if she is okay, and she says she is, thanks to him. He wonders who could have set up this trap. Even with some suspects in mind, he questions who it really could be. The false James Moriarty is certain that it's not just one or two people. Suddenly, a man in a suit calls his attention, noticing that he is unguarded. At that moment, our hero sees the remaining members of the Red Society. Ludger asks if they still haven't realized that their organization has fallen. The thug says he is well aware of that, which is why he prepared something special. Ludger notices a strange scent in the air. Realizing that it's diffusion incense, he warns Violet not to use magic, as it will be hard to control. The thug then recognizes the woman's voice and thinks he can take down two birds with one staff. Violet comments that using her body isn't her style, which irritates the sophisticated and elegant woman. Our hero asks if Violet is going to fight, and she says there's no choice. They have been surrounded. The Master of Disguise then asks if she knows how to dance, and she confidently responds that she can dance so well that others would feel envious. Both put their trust in each other, leaving their backs exposed as they prepared to fight. Without delay, the two began engaging in close combat in the middle of the alley, taking down several thugs. The gangsters hadn't expected them to be so strong even without magic, though they assumed the two must be getting tired. Violet is already feeling exhausted, and Ludger advises her to increase her stamina after this. Reflecting, our hero notices that he still can't find the person who shot the arrow. This makes Ludger question whether the archer is hiding after the surprise attack, using rare diffusion incense and the ability to suppress their killing intent. It's clear that there is a professional among the remaining members of the Red Society. Ludger grabs the woman and carries her in his arms, sprinting away from the henchmen. The men notice that he is escaping with the woman and immediately decide to pursue them. Our hero realizes that there is a professional assassin hiding among them, putting them at a disadvantage. Violet is shocked to discover that a sniper assassin is present. Meanwhile, the two continue to be chased by numerous gang members. Masked and hooded men wielding daggers sprint after them at incredible speed. Violet comments that they are annihilators from the southern desert, mercenaries who kill for money. Coming from the southern desert, it is an assassin from Casalpa, just as Ludger had suspected. As he uses his grappling hook, he warns Violet to be careful and not to bite her tongue. Both of them climb onto the rooftop, but the henchmen quickly follow after them. One of the masked men hurls two sharp weapons toward the duo. Before they can be hit, the woman pulls out her umbrella and uses it as a shield. It proves to be effective. However, her special umbrella begins to melt, and she questions what kind of substance is on the daggers. Ludger explains that it's a special poison used by Casalpa assassins, something that cannot be blocked. When the woman asks what they should do, Ludger suggests they either wait for the daggers to run out, or focus on escaping together from the Casalpa assassins. Violet finds the second option better, so Ludger picks her up and sprints at full speed. Leaping off the rooftop, he slides down the tiles toward the ground. The masked men pursue them like stealthy, swift ninjas, throwing themselves off the rooftop as well, until they suddenly notice the woman on the ground, arguing with a man and calling him a coward for abandoning her. The assassin wielding the daggers wonders if the man truly ran away and left her alone, but finds that hard to believe. Soon he realizes that this is a trap, and that the woman is merely bait. Now convinced, he assumes the man is hiding somewhere nearby. He stealthily approaches the woman from behind, raising his daggers against her. The moment he throws them, they hit the wall. Violet vanishes right before his eyes. In an instant, our hero appears behind the henchman and finishes him off with his sword. Shocked, the ninja asks how, and Ludger replies that it was magic, using diffusion properties. Without saying anything more or less, the protagonist ends the henchman's life. Even though the incense's effect was minor, it still disrupted his magic slightly. At that exact moment, the woman shouts for James Moriarty to stay alert. There's someone above him. With his cane in hand, he turns to face the attacker, already prepared for the strike. To Ludger's surprise, his enemy launches a grappling hook to snatch his weapon. Using the chain, the assailant pulls the cane away and hurls it into the distance, charging at Ludger with his dagger. He declares that this is the end for him. Stunned, Ludger's eyes widen as he notices that the man had another weapon concealed in his coat. That very weapon is what our hero uses to swiftly strike down his opponent. In mere seconds, the target collapses to the ground, unable to comprehend what just happened. He acknowledges that his enemy acted well, but was careless at the one moment he couldn't afford to be. The other henchmen claim they heard noises coming from the direction where the duo is. Ludger states that the effect of the diffusion incense is wearing off and asks Violet to handle the rest. The woman smirks, saying it will be easy, and right on cue, the henchmen arrive at their location. In an instant, elemental magic is conjured before an elder from the Red Society. This magic, cast by the lady, creates a massive blue explosion that wipes out the gang. She declares that it's over and didn't expect to be ambushed right as the gang was exterminated. James Moriarty deduces that someone else must have given the order for them to be there. He assumes that the same person who hired the assassins also commanded the rest of the gang. Having eliminated Belfort Rickson, our protagonist crosses him off his blacklist of suspects. Violet is stunned upon learning that he was the one who took down Belfort Rickson. She remarks that he was involved in something dirty, funding atrocities that violated human integrity. Speaking of which, Ludger decides to leave his new recruits under Violet's care. In exchange, he also wants her to track down the person responsible for this incident. The lady comments that things will get busy since they also have to manage business affairs. Teasing her, the protagonist asks if she won't be able to handle it, which wounds her pride. She promises him that she will do everything flawlessly and work even harder than he thinks. With a firm and confident gaze toward the madame, our hero says that was a good answer. With that, the duo parts ways, and Ludger Chelsy wishes for her to take care of herself in the meantime. Outside an unknown location, someone calls for their assistant, who immediately denies having such a role. Ludger opens the door to the place, finding people arguing over the assistant position. He had already imagined the reason for the noise, and there we see Sheridan, a colleague of Ludger, on top of Hans. Shocked and at a disadvantage, his dear friend pleads for help, but Ludger simply says it looks fun. Chelsy tells her to stop playing around with hands and take a look at something, and she obeys. She notices that the arpeo is damaged because it had carried another person along with it. The dwarf Sheridan estimates that it will take about 10 minutes to repair the tool. Annoyed, Hans asks why the girl is so mean to him, and Ludger replies that it's because he is weak. He adds that she is actually older than Hans, so he should be patient with her. Hans had initially thought she was a child and asks if Ludger saw her in the mines of the Delicate Kingdom. His friend confirms that he did because she was a slave in that place. Recalling the day they found the dwarf in the cave, Hans questions whether it was forced labor. Feeling a chill, he knows they would have been wiped out if those bombs had been activated. Ludger says that if those explosives had gone off underground, even a knight captain would have been eliminated. Hans mentions that he saw some strange individuals going after him, and Ludger says he has already taken care of the targets. Thinking that someone must be behind them, he asks Hans to look into it. Saying that he's exhausted from checking the auction items, Sheridan suddenly calls for her assistant. Ludger tells Hans to help Sheridan first, just to make sure she doesn't swap the gunpowder. Knowing they will probably take more than 30 minutes, he decides to take a nap. Suddenly, Chelsy notices suspicious movement. Quick and light footsteps, almost inaudible. A group moving in such perfect synchronization at this hour makes him wonder who they are. And then, out of nowhere, a woman with purple eyes detects Ludger's presence and looks in his direction. Her subordinate asks the captain what's wrong. At that exact moment, our protagonist hides, and the woman sees nothing. He initially thought they were knights, but then, the woman's hair. He recognizes her as Tarina Lionhowl, the protector of the Nightcrawler Knights Order. He wonders why she is in Lethavelk and knows she is in charge of the Belfort case. Perhaps she suspects that this case is connected to the werewolf incident. However, Ludger has already erased the evidence and has no intention of getting involved with her again.
Our video ends here. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, bye bye.